Chapter 5:19. Zhang Xiuzhu slowly raised his right hand and pressed down Yu Dingxin's hand. He smiled and said, "Brother, that's a good question. If I want to win this war, I have to tell you what our chance of victory is. I also have to tell you why I'm so sure that we can win when I'm sure you're no match for them in a hand-to-hand combat." This time, even the burly man and Yu Dingxin looked at him with curiosity written all over their faces. First of all, although they are indeed elites who are stronger than us, they are still defeated soldiers in essence. If you've been praised as number one in the world for so many years and then suddenly got pulled down from your pedestal, your first reaction would be to fight with your life on the line. But if you can't beat them, you would feel sorry for yourself and feel that you don't deserve the title of number one in the world. If you meet someone who's not weak, you might not be able to win. Right now, the Divine Forest Army's reserve forces were in such a state of mind. Simply put, their confidence had already been shattered. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have this round of arrow rain. In the past, how could the Divine Forest Army's reserve forces put us, who had seen our banners, in their eyes? Second of all, although they seemed to have the upper hand, we didn't lose much of our main force. On the contrary, not long after they were defeated in Wei River City, their connection with the Central Plains was cut off by us. No matter how elite they are, as long as they can't cross the Wei River, they are like rootless duckweeds. Their arrows and rations are getting less and less because there are no lone troops on this plain. They are either hordes of demon beasts or demi-human troops, a large number of auxiliary troops from my southern expedition, or the fallen star army that broke their mentality. Therefore, they can't get any supplies at all. Of course, you may ask me why they don't bully the Shuangjin barbarian. In fact, the answer is very simple. Because the Shuangjin barbarian are now poorer and more miserable than them. At least there are some supplies stored in the Wei River City tunnels for them to maintain. But what can the Shuangjin barbarian eat after their rations and horses? They were so hungry that they wanted to eat people. Thirdly, based on the above situation, Shenlin Jun's reserve force is currently using the tactic of breaking up the entire force and trying to infiltrate all parts of the northern frontier territory. They are waiting for the Shenwu dynasty to use them in the future. However, the northern frontier territory is currently being cleaned up and all the resources have been moved to the hinterland of the northern frontier. The northern frontier prince's mansion is in charge of the distribution of the resources, and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce is personally escorting them. Therefore, it is a complete joke for them to try to infiltrate the place. Not to mention all kinds of supplies, they might not even be able to find people. That's why the bullsh *T of breaking up into smaller groups and sneaking into other places is just to fool people. They split up into various small groups simply because their main group can't support so many people. They can only be separated and left to fend for themselves. That's why we've only encountered some abandoned remnants. That's why they don't dare to show themselves even now. Zhang Xiuzhu stretched out his hand and pointed at the dense forest in front of them. He grinned and said, "What you're facing now isn't the world's number one. It's just a group of defeated and abandoned dregs. Can anyone tell me how we're going to lose against such dregs?" Pa. 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 Zhang Xiuzhu stretched out his hand and slapped his face as he spoke. He said coldly, "We can't lose this battle, and we can't lose. Anyway, I, Zhang Xiuzhu, can't afford to lose face like this. I think everyone here can't afford to lose face like this either. Fight to the death. Fight to the death." Zhang Xiuzhu's method of mobilizing the troops' morale wasn't brilliant, but it was very clever. Firstly, he directly stated that with their strength, they would definitely be annihilated if they engaged in hand-to-hand combat. This made certain people who were eager to gain merit and disregarded the consequences would have no choice but to obediently stay behind the fortifications and listen to Zhang Xiuzhu's arrangements. Secondly, Zhang Xiuzhu fully analyzed the situation of the troops opposite them. In an atmosphere of near despair, he forcibly described the reserves of the world's number one army as smelly trash. This allowed them to see the dawn of victory in their despair. Thirdly, Zhang Xiuzhu bluntly called the other party dregs. If he lost this battle, wouldn't it mean that their team was even worse than dregs? No one was willing to lose face. Even Zhang Xiuzhu, who had lost both his parents and begged from door to door every day when he was young. Zhang Xiuzhu, who relied on hundreds of families to survive, couldn't afford to lose face like this. Not only would these people, who had relatives and friends, die in society, but even their relatives and friends would also be unable to raise their heads. Pa! Pa! Hearing the shouts around him, Zhang Xiuzhu gently clapped his hands to signal for everyone to be quiet. He smiled and said, "All right, although these dregs have become the first step to our fame, if we want to win this battle, we still have to follow my arrangements. Now, let's bury the pot and cook." Huh? The corner of Yu Dingxin's mouth twitched violently again. What the F***ck is he playing at? First, he stirred up the morale of the troops with a set of twists and turns. This bastard actually didn't take advantage of this time to do anything meaningful. Instead, he wanted the troops to bury the pot and cook, as if everyone had been hungry all this time. I know, you guys don't know why I want you to bury the pot and cook. Actually, I don't want to explain it. Zhang Xiuzhu watched the troops begin to prepare, then he smiled and said, "But just in case, I advise you guys to use this time to adjust the crossbows and familiarize yourself with the swords. Otherwise, when those guys rush out later, you guys won't even be able to withstand the first round. Those Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers inside don't know when the last time they had a proper meal is. If we cook here, once the aroma spreads out, it would be strange if they obediently watch." Awesome team. After a short moment of silence, a young soldier suddenly yelled out. Even if they were on the plains, they might not be able to beat him, let alone in the dense forest with complicated terrain. These Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers had been on guard for the past 2 days. Zhang Xiuzhu really didn't have the confidence to take down this tough bone. After all, they were a group of elite soldiers. If they only relied on the geographical advantage of the dense forest to defend themselves, even if Li Zhongxing and his personal guards came over, there was no way they could win this battle. However, these Shenlin Jun reserve soldiers didn't attack them because they hated the people from the northern frontier. From the very beginning, their goal was to escort this batch of supplies. After all, the transport team of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce wasn't something that a group of defeated soldiers could challenge in terms of size and strength. Therefore, the Frost Mirror Cavalry wasn't the only ones who couldn't get supplies. Chapter 520. The supply troops brought back 2 bags of food that were scattered outside the attack range of the forest. They quickly started cooking. However, the rest of the troops didn't chat like they usually did when they were waiting for their meals. Instead, they silently used whetstones to test the sharpness of their weapons. A group of soldiers with strange crossbows were squatting behind the simple fortifications. They were all listening to the movements on the other side of the fortifications. To them, the enemy that attacked first was nothing but prey. "Brother Yu, what did your team leader say?" Kei Teng, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, turned his head and asked Yu Dingxin. His face was pale from fear. He didn't know who the ambushers in the forest were, but they definitely weren't the Frost Mirror Cavalry. The arrows they used weren't the arrows of the Frost Mirror Grassland. Even if the Frost Mirror Cavalry were starving, they wouldn't attack their own people. "Our commander said that there's a group of troublesome enemies hiding in the forest ahead. If we rush in and engage them in hand-to-hand combat, we'll lose without a doubt." Yu Dingxin chewed on the jerky in his hand as he spoke slowly. "But their target is our supplies. If we start cooking here, they'll take the risk and rush out of the forest to attack us. At that time, we can rely on the fortifications to kill them one by one." The reason Yu Dingxin was eating jerky wasn't because he had the privilege of an officer. It was because 500 of them, including him, were chosen to be Shenlin Jun's reserve troops. They were the last line of defense near the fortifications. Once that happened, they had to rush out and engage the enemy in hand-to-hand combat to buy time and space for the archers behind them to kill the enemy. "Then, did your team leader say who the other party was?" Kei Teng looked at the jerky in Yu Dingxin's hand and swallowed his saliva as he asked in a low voice. Because Zhang Xiuzhu was a meticulous person, he always remembered what his persona was. Even when he was trying to boost morale, he was still using the code words of the Northern Frontier Army. Therefore, from what Ting heard, the Demute general was constantly telling his troops unknown numbers, and yet he was still able to stir up everyone's emotions. That was why Ting asked this question out of curiosity. It wasn't that he hadn't thought that the enemy in the forest was the army of the northern region, but Zhang Xiuzhu and his men had reacted too quickly. The sentries who had gone into the forest to scout the situation hadn't even come out in a dozen breaths. They had immediately overturned the supply wagons and withstood the first salvo. Ting did not believe that this was Zhang Xiuzhu's prediction. After all, if such an outstanding general was placed in the Shuangjin dynasty, he would at least be a major commander who commanded tens of thousands of cavalry. He would not be a direct subordinate of only 5 people. All of this seemed like a script that the northern frontier had prepared in advance. But after giving it some thought, Ting felt that this wasn't the case. If the northern territory wanted to send people to disguise themselves as other troops to ambush and kill, they would first have to let these people see the other party's armor or identification. Then, while they were charging in, they would also make sure to leave behind some of the more important people among them as witnesses to report back to the empire. This would infuriate the Reflection Frost dynasty. However, the enemy had no intention of showing up until now. Moreover, the previous attacks had no intention of leaving anyone alive. The only reason they were able to survive the first round of attacks was because of their cultivation and riding skills. After dodging the scythe of the Grim Reaper, they were able to roll and crawl behind the temporary fortifications. Pfft, Yu Dingchen sneered and narrowed his eyes. The Shuangjin dynasty might not have many spies, but that doesn't mean they don't know anything about the Frost Mirror Plains, right? Young clan leader, how many troops do you think there are in the north that can be considered troublesome to deal with? Aside from the Shuangjin dynasty's Blood Liao Knights, the only force that could influence the north was Shenlin Jun. Thinking of this, Ting's lips trembled. He whispered, "Are you guys crazy? How dare we challenge Shenlin Jun with just the few of us? No wonder your team leader said that if we fought hand to hand, you would lose without a doubt." At this point, Ting's expression changed slightly and he continued, "Also, if it really is the Divine Forest Army, your crossbow bolts may not be able to penetrate their armor. Fighting a positional battle is only delaying them a little. If this continues, we will all die." Yu Dingchen shook his head and smiled. "What Shenlin Jun? They are just a bunch of defeated soldiers who have abandoned their armor. Not to mention that their armor might not be useful, even if it could block our arrows, they wouldn't have the guts to wear it. After all, the Divine Forest Army's reserve force had already been crushed by Gao Jie. The group of soldiers who had escaped were already in a state of panic. When the army couldn't afford to feed so many people, not only would they be chased out of the group, even the armor or training uniform that could prove their identity would be taken away. If the defeated soldiers were to flee in the north, they would encounter the northern frontier army sooner or later. If a few powerful characters appeared, it would be easy for them to calculate the movement path of the defeated soldiers based on where they appeared. Then, they would be able to annihilate them. As a precaution, when the defeated soldiers were kicked out of the group, everything that could prove their identity would be taken away. When a tiger lost its claws and teeth, and an elephant lost its skin, these so-called fierce beasts, what was there to be afraid of? At this point, Yu Dingchen raised the jerky in his hand and said with a smile, "There's also this food. After eating it, you'll have to rush out and engage in close combat with the enemy when they're close enough to buy time for the archers behind. I see that you have been staring at it, do you want to eat?" Keijua's expression changed slightly. While he grew up in a harsh environment like the Frost Mirror grassland and was at the pinnacle of the airborne realm, as the young chief of the Green Fish tribe, how much danger could he have encountered? Many years of living like a prince had long since wiped away the courage in Keijua's body, and what little courage he had left was not enough to support his courage to charge out and engage in close combat with the enemy after knowing the identity of the enemy. Therefore, after a moment of hesitation, Keijua shook his head very calmly. It was obvious that he had overcome his appetite. They were all elite soldiers, so they carried out orders very quickly. It didn't take long for the aroma of the stewed rice to spread. Not only did it spread to the jungle, but even the simple fortifications had many people drooling. However, everyone knew that the cooking was just to lure the enemy out. At the very least, they had to wait until the upcoming battle was over before they could enjoy the meal. Chapter 521. About 500 miles away from the fortifications. Xiao En, who had tied his long blonde hair behind his head, leaned against a tree trunk next to him and raised his hand to signal for them to stop. Nearly 5,000 tree elves quickly stopped and squatted on the tree trunks, clenching the black composite bows in their hands. Further away, nearly 10,000 soldiers riding various Yao beasts also put on their helmets and faceplates again, clenching their spears and halberds, waiting for Commander Xiao En's next order. They were the demi-human troops under Xiao En's direct command. Although they were not counted as part of the army of the northern frontier, their contribution in this war was not small. Once the war was over, they could quickly get rid of their temporary status and become the first regular army composed of demi-humans in the nominally human-led forces. They would no longer be the slave soldiers and cannon fodder they used to be. For the entire demi-human race, this change was obviously rare and commendable. It was worth it for them to risk their lives for it. Lin Yuan's voice slowly sounded in their minds. 500 miles ahead, a southern expedition is preparing for battle. Quickly move to the battlefield and prepare for support. But remember, this battle does not belong to your troops. Unless your allies are about to be wiped out, you and your subordinates are not allowed to intervene. Yes. Xiao En cupped his hands toward the void in front of him, a touch of excitement appearing on his cold face. Their original mission was to wander between the Frost Mirror Cavalry's encampment and Eastwood City. They were supposed to kill the reservists of the Divine Forest Army and the exiles of the Frost Mirror Cavalry to ensure that these people would not affect Eastwood City's Great Wall plan. But this time, Lin Yuan personally gave the order, which meant that they could end this boring and tedious work. They could soon enter the battlefield and prove to the human soldiers that their demi-human army was also powerful. Everyone, stay hidden and follow me. Remember, don't attack without my order. Xiao En waved his hand and gave a few instructions to the subordinates around him. Soon, a herald flew out with a flag signal. This war machine composed of more than 10,000 demi-humans was once again in operation. In Shunning City. Ding Zai stood beside Lin Yuan with a smile and said in a deep voice, Lord Dragon King is indeed an ambitious and ruthless man, playing the Shuangjin dynasty and Shenwu dynasty in the palm of your hand. Every move of yours is like a calm chess player, precise, deadly, and elegant. Stop your flattery. Li Zhong, who was sitting on the throne, interrupted Ding Zai's flattery and sneered, I heard that Shanglu Association is very dissatisfied with a subordinate like you who played a good hand so badly. Originally, they wanted to execute you, but seeing that you still worked hard, they sent you on another mission to atone for your crimes. I think, your mission isn't to come to the northern frontier to flatter our Dragon King, right? Lin Yuan also coldly glanced at Ding Zai. Although he didn't say anything, the meaning was very clear, carrying a bit of warning. Ding Zai's face slightly stiffened. He looked at Li Zhong with some fear, a cold light flashing in his eyes. Shanglu Association was a top faction after all. Their every move was hidden in the inner layer of the world. Even if they were doing something, countless people would use superficial skills to cover it up. If it wasn't for internal members leaking information, outsiders would definitely not know about Shanglu Association's actions. Now that Li Zhong had seen through his disguise so easily, it was obvious that he had received some information in advance. Either the Shifter Emperor Association's spies had already infiltrated Shanglu Association, and their status shouldn't be low. Otherwise, they wouldn't know about the higher-ups' opinions on how to deal with him. Or, there were people in Shanglu Association who wished for Ding Zai's death. Before he arrived at the northern frontier, they had already leaked information to the northern frontier, letting Lin Yuan and Li Zhong know that he came with a mission that he had to complete. Because of this, they would have a bad impression of him. At the very least, all the channels of persuasion and flattery to repair the relationship between the two sides were blocked. Is Shanglu Association dissatisfied with this king's division of benefits, or? Lin Yuan finally opened his mouth, and there was some indifference in his tone. He wasn't afraid that Shanglu Association would fall out with him. After all, he wasn't strong enough. In this incident, he was only playing the role of cutting the cake. he didn't even eat much of the cake. All he could do was lick the cream on his knife. If Shanglu Association wasn't satisfied with this division of benefits, then they wouldn't be challenging Lin Yuan. Instead, they would be challenging the huge interest group formed by the other top factions. In the face of such a level of power, even if Shanglu Association was a top faction, it was just a building that could be crushed at any time. Ding Zai shook his head lightly and sneered. Dragon King, you are overthinking. Although I am indeed here with a mission, this matter won't affect you or me. In fact, it is an enemy that you have to face. By informing you in advance, I am doing your northern frontier a huge favor. It will prevent you from being overwhelmed. Speaking up to this point, Ding Zai cast a sidelong glance at Li Zhong. The sneer on his face deepened. I originally wanted to repair the relationship between the two sides. After all, I am a vice president of the Association of the Demon Arch. If I could obtain the support of the Association of the Demon Arch, then I would have more authority in Shanglu Association. In some decisions, I would naturally be more biased towards the northern frontier. Unfortunately, it seems like I was overthinking. Lin Yuan and Li Zhong both looked at Ding Zai with indifferent expressions. They didn't seem to be moved at all. Among the three people present, which one of them wasn't a demon? If Ding Zai could obtain the support of the Association of the Demon Arch, he would indeed be biased towards them in Shanglu Association's decisions regarding the northern frontier. However, that was only because with a powerful association of the Demon Arch, Ding Zai's power would be greater. Both sides were in a relationship of mutual benefit and prosperity. It wasn't like Ding Zai's tone sounded like he was only looking out for the northern frontier. Ahem, then I will be direct. This time, I came to the northern frontier to inform you of the news. It is Lei Qiusheng's trump card. Because you, Lin Yuan, had previously led the evil sect members to the south, Lei Qiusheng had found a very suitable target to push the blame to. As such, we can no longer intervene. This matter can also be said to be you lifting a rock and smashing it on your own feet. Therefore, before the northern frontier is destroyed and things become completely out of control, we will not directly intervene. Ding Zai cleared his throat. Clearly, he didn't expect that Lin Yuan and Li Zhong didn't have any intention of giving him a way out. With resentment in his heart, Ding Zai didn't even use honorifics. Looking at Lin Yuan and Li Zhong, there was even a hint of pity in his eyes. Don't talk nonsense. Li Zhong's face darkened as he growled in a low voice. Chapter 522. The reason why Lei Qiusheng dared to tear the Shenwu dynasty apart is actually very simple. It's because his trump card isn't an army or powerful cultivators. It's because he obtained support that he shouldn't have. With their existence, let alone the Shenwu dynasty, it's not impossible for him to sweep through the world if we don't interfere. The Dragon King is in existence from the ancient demon court. I think in the documents you obtained, there should be something called the Sky Demon recorded. It is the same as the Dragon race and the Kirin race today, an existence from the other side of the Celestial Gate. And unlike the former, these Sky Demons do not have any goodwill towards us. In their eyes, all living things are just food. Lei Qiusheng's trump card is that he has a relationship with a terrifying Sky Demon. When necessary, as long as Lei Qiusheng can give enough sacrifices, he can summon a group of powerful Sky Demons to fight for him. And during this period of war, countless souls have become sacrifices for Lei Qiusheng to please the Sky Demon. In other words, he does not need to make any preparations to pull in the Sky Demon army in the south. After these Sky Demons eat all the living things in the south, they will regain part of their rationality. In this way, Lei Qiusheng can command the Sky Demon army through that powerful existence. For example, he can let them bypass the Central Plains and attack the northern frontier, Frost Mirror, and Xinjiang. Ding Zai shook his head and smiled bitterly. In order to shut our mouths, Lei Qiusheng pushed this matter to the evil cult in the south and pointed the reason for the evil cult entering the south to you. Therefore, it is not good for us to interfere. In addition, you are the successor of the demon court, so you naturally have the obligation to deal with these dirty guys. So, Li Zhong digested the information and said with a dark face, because you are afraid of trouble, you decided to let us fight with Lei Qiusheng? To put it bluntly, that is indeed the case. Ding Zai put his hands behind his back and said in a deep voice, in our original plan, once Lei Qiusheng is forced into a corner, he will naturally summon the Sky Demon Army. At that time, we can legitimately interfere and directly wipe out the Sky Demon and Lei Qiusheng. But now, according to the higher-ups, you caused the trouble, so you have to deal with it yourselves. At this point, Ding Zai paused. Seeing that the man and the Sky Demon had no intention of acting up, he continued, of course, we will support them from the outside. The chaos of the Sky Demon can only occur in the Shenwu dynasty. Once the northern frontier is destroyed, or the Sky Demon leave the Shenwu dynasty's territory, we will immediately eliminate them. Ding Zai's meaning was that the life and death of the northern frontier had nothing to do with them. When he finished speaking, Ding Zai had already planned to leave. After all, Lin Yuan and Li Zhong did not give him any face. Right now, he could not wait for the northern frontier to be destroyed, so that he could wash away the humiliation on his body. If you walk out like that, I can guarantee that even if I don't do anything to you, the Upper Deer Association will destroy your soul. Lin Yuan's voice suddenly sounded behind Ding Zai. Ding Zai's movements paused slightly, a layer of cold sweat suddenly appeared on his forehead. This was because the term, soul dispersing, did not belong to the Sky Martial Continent. It was the highest punishment that the top powers would use to deal with their enemies, traitors, and trash. Once someone was included in this list, even their soul would be completely destroyed. Although Lin Yuan could tell from his innate ability to summon the Nether Realm's black water that there was no underworld in this world, there was still a law that guided the souls and the dead in this world to reincarnate. And from the fact that there were no demons and monsters in this world, this law was much more effective than the so-called underworld. Once the soul was destroyed, it was equivalent to being completely erased from this world. It would be impossible to reincarnate or become a Yin spirit. It was a punishment that was even more severe than death. The Upper Deer Association also benefits from this, so it's not good for us to directly interfere. It doesn't mean that we won't interfere. If you refuse to carry out the mission given by the higher-ups, you will die a horrible death, and even your soul will not be able to escape. Lin Yuan's voice sounded again, like the whispers of a demon from the underworld lying on a human's shoulder. Ding Zai turned around and was about to speak when Lin Yuan interrupted him again. I have the means to deal with the Sky Demon, so I don't need you to provide me with the weapons needed to kill the Sky Demon. But after destroying the Sky Demon's body, my army must have the demon-suppressing weapon to ensure that all the dead Sky Demons will be captured and brought to me. According to the inheritance of the underwater secret realm, the Sky Demon was actually a spiritual body similar to a ghost. They could invade other worlds at will, but they did not have a physical body. They could only use the method of seducing life forms to possess them. Then, they would fulfill the desires of the possessed person and devour the other person's soul. After achieving their goal of taking over the other person's nest, they would become a real threat to the creatures of this world. Of course, the Sky Demon needed time to nourish his body and recover his strength. He could not possess just anyone he saw. Only those with strong resentment, hatred, and other negative emotions would become the target of his seduction. Neutral and peaceful creatures would not be able to sense the existence of the Sky Demon at all. This was an extremely troublesome thing, but it was also extremely easy to deal with. For example, the current citizens of the northern frontier were much happier than before. Naturally, they were in good shape and would not give the Sky Demon any chance to take advantage of them. Thus, in theory, as long as all the creatures in the territory were happy, the Sky Demon would never breed. However, for the Shenwu dynasty, the continuous battles and hopeless predicament caused the citizens of the Shenwu dynasty to develop a large number of negative emotions. This could be said to be a breeding ground for the Sky Demon. The most troublesome thing about the Sky Demon was that they were spiritual bodies. Even if their physical bodies were destroyed, they would not die. At most, their minds would be injured and they would transform into formless objects to escape. After a period of time, they would possess a new physical body and become a new Sky Demon warrior. However, it was obvious that not everyone had a way to see and attack spiritual bodies. If they did not have the demon-suppressing weapon developed by the Heavenly Gate Guardian, these sky demon warriors would not be destroyed even if they died 100 times. They would be able to wear down the citizens of the northern frontier. What was even more frightening was that once they fell into a quagmire of war that they could not see any hope of winning, the citizens of the northern frontier would develop all sorts of negative emotions. In the timeline of the Tianwu continent, who knew how many powerful forces had been destroyed because of the sky demon that could not be killed? However, Lin Yuan's nether realm black water could be said to be the nemesis of the sky demon. The more sky demon he pulled in, the more powerful Lin Yuan's natural endowments would be. However, it was obvious that he could not appear anywhere in the northern frontier at any time. It was even more impossible for him to deal with the sky demon army that was attacking from all sides. Chapter 523. This condition is acceptable, but the Deer Association's ability is limited. We can't equip all your troops with a demon-suppressing artifact. Even if we join forces with the other top factions, we can only equip every 5,000 troops with a demon-suppressing artifact. Ding Zai spread out his hands and frowned. Lei Qiusheng summoning the Sky Demon Army is just a small matter to the entire Sky Martial continent. The enemy we have to face is even more ferocious, and even if we have extra demon-suppressing artifacts, we can use them to replace the damaged ones at any time. Yes. Lin Yuan nodded slightly. An enemy that could pin down all the top experts of the Sky Martial continent was indeed terrifying. Even the current Lin Yuan felt a headache when facing the Sky Demon Army, but these top forces had to face opponents that were even more ferocious and powerful than the Sky Demon. At the same time, they had to deploy a portion of their people to monitor the entire Sky Martial continent at all times to prevent the enemy from stabbing them in the back. Including the demon-suppressing artifacts in the inherited memories, as well as the information about the world on the other side of the Heaven Gate, they were not created out of thin air. Countless creatures had paid the price of blood to accumulate this information bit by bit. It was also because of this unyielding spirit and sacrifice that the Sky Martial continent was able to maintain its current prosperous and peaceful appearance. The history of the creatures on the other side of the Heaven Gate tens of thousands of years ago had already been sealed in the long river of history by all the top forces. Unless one reached a certain realm or had an ancient inheritance, they would not be able to obtain any information. However, Ding Zai's gaze paused on Lin Yuan for a moment, and his tone became respectful again. You said that you have a way to deal with the Sky Demon. Do you mean to seal them, or, the Sky Demon was a large race of creatures on the other side of the Heaven Gate. Their fighting strength was not considered strong, and because they had an almost unlimited lifespan, the Sky Demon's cultivation speed was also abnormally slow. Other than under certain circumstances, if a Sky Demon wanted to directly affect the material world, they still needed a physical body. The stronger the Sky Demon, the higher the aptitude of the physical body, and the longer the time needed to recover their strength. However, the Sky Demon had no qualms about invading the Sky Martial continent because the cultivators of the Sky Martial continent did not have the ability to kill them. Even if they managed to find a devil-suppressing artifact that could seal the Sky Demon's spiritual body, the cultivators of the Martial Heaven continent could only bury the devil-suppressing artifact in some forbidden areas and then set up all kinds of traps and formations to ensure that no living beings would approach. Releasing the Sky Demon was just a way to imprison him. These sealed Sky Demons were still a huge threat because the Sky Demons could sense each other. Once a Sky Demon broke through the defenses set up by the cultivators, it would be very easy for the sealed Sky Demon to be released. Such cases were not rare. You can say that I killed him. Lin Yuan's different-colored eyes curved slightly, like a pair of crescent moons. He said calmly, they will exist in another form, but they will not casually threaten the living beings of the Sky Martial continent. Furthermore, the other Sky Demon will not be able to find them. Even if they find them, they will be treated as enemies. Was there a better method to deal with the Sky Demon than the sticks? As long as they dared to face Lin Yuan head-on, however many Sky Demons there were, they would be able to devour as many Sky Demons as there were. Lin Yuan's nether realm's black water would become longer and wider because of this. The Sky Demon that was pulled into the nether realm's black water would not die, but they would become Lin Yuan's most loyal warriors. Even if they encountered their own kind, they would be pulled into the nether realm's black water to accompany them. Then, let's wait and see. Ding Zai bowed slightly to Lin Yuan and said in a deep voice, "We have sealed many sky demon all these years, but we have never been able to completely kill them. In recent years, due to the deaths of some powerful beings and the extinction of their forces, some ancient forbidden areas have already lost control. We suspect that the powerful sky demon that Lei Qiusheng contacted is most likely an ancient sky demon that broke out of the seal. Be careful." As soon as he finished speaking, Ding Zai left King Shuning's residence and quickly headed south. Li Zhong walked behind Lin Yuan and asked with a frown, "Dragon King, do you think this person's words can be trusted?" Li Zhong was born in a poor family, and there were no outstanding cultivators among his ancestors. In addition, all the top forces had joined hands to create an information blockade. If he was not loyal to Lin Yuan, he would never have come into contact with these things. If he came into contact with them, it would mean that the Sky Martial Continent was finished. Therefore, Li Zhong would not express his own opinion on this matter, because an outsider was an outsider. Every word he said could affect Lin Yuan to make the wrong decision. Therefore, he could only remind Lin Yuan that Ding Zai was not trustworthy. Even if both sides were using each other, they had to be on guard in advance to avoid falling into the trap of others. 70% true, 30% false. Lin Yuan's smiling eyes returned to normal. He asked, "Is there any news from the south?" Li Zhong nodded slightly. After hesitating for a while, he frowned and said, "Qin Yu sent a message saying that a new force has appeared in the south. It seems to be called Jade Lake Immortal Palace. After investigation, it is confirmed that this Jade Lake Immortal Palace has released a kind of immortal elixir called Jade Lake Immortal Elixir. It is said that after persuading, one can leave their physical body and become an immortal. Then the Jade Lake Immortal Palace will provide a new young physical body for the immortal, helping them break free from the shackles of their lifespan. Do you believe it?" Lin Yuan's voice contained a bit of a smile, but his expression did not change in the slightest. Li Zhong did not hesitate this time. He shook his head decisively and said in a cold voice, "There is no such thing as a free benefit in this world. I heard that the Jade Lake Immortal Palace does not take any benefits and gives the so-called immortal elixir to the cultivators who come to their door for free. Anyone with a bit of brain knows that this is a huge trap. Being able to let cultivators break free from their physical body that was about to decay due to the end of their lifespan and change into a new physical body to move about in the world was something that all cultivators dreamed of. After all, even the Imperial Sky Realm to the Heaven Star Realm could be said to be one step at a time. There were many cultivators who were stuck at a bottleneck and died. Even Beast Lord Kirin, who was said to be at the peak of the mortal world, was like this, not to mention other people with mediocre talent. If one could obtain an immortal lifespan, then there would be more possibilities. Perhaps one could really break into the next realm. But there was such a good thing that could be enjoyed without paying any price? Only those who were about to die and were unwilling to die and those brainless idiots would believe it. Chapter 524. It seems like our Black Jiao Beast King isn't interested in the elixir of immortality. Before Lin Yuan could say anything, a deep voice rang out. In the next moment, a Kirin the size of a small pony with a dark green body appeared in front of Li Zhong. Although it hadn't fully manifested itself, the powerful aura it exuded shocked Li Zhong so much that he couldn't speak. With such an appearance and such strength, there was only one existence in the entire Hengduan mountain range that fit the criteria. The Beast King Kirin, Incubus. Lin Yuan was silent for a moment before he neutralized Kirin's aura. He chuckled and said, "Senior, you have inherited the memories from your bloodline. Naturally, you know better than me what the elixir of immortality is. Why are you teasing a junior like me?" Yao beasts were a race that paid attention to bloodlines. This was because their bloodline didn't only contain power, but also the memories engraved by their ancestors. Once their strength reached a certain level, these memories would awaken. Therefore, true descendants of divine beasts didn't need to worry about cultivation techniques at all. Once they reached a certain level, they would naturally obtain the techniques that belonged to their ancestors. Everyone thought that the Beast King Kirin was stuck at the peak of the desolate demon realm because he couldn't find the door. Only a few people knew that if he wanted to, he could break through to the next level at any time. It was just that he didn't do so. According to Lin Yuan's train of thought, the Beast King Kirin's style was more like the main characters in the novels in his previous life. They didn't want to copy the path of their ancestors because it was a path that belonged to others. Even if they walked step by step, they would only reach the peak of their ancestors. It would be a fool's dream to go further. As for the Beast Master Qilin, it was not satisfied with being at the peak of the desolate demon realm. It was ambitious and wanted to carve out a path that belonged to itself. That was why it had been stuck at the peak of the desolate demon realm for so long. It was because of its talent and ambition. If it really couldn't do anything, it could still choose to accept the gifts from its ancestors and steadily break through to extend its lifespan. The reason Kirin was choosing the next Beast Master was not because he was dying, but because he had already reached the threshold during his seclusion. Therefore, he could not wait to come out of seclusion and choose the next Beast Master who could continue the inheritance of the Hengduan mountain range. He would then embark on his own path that he did not know the end of. Incubus nodded slightly and chuckled. I don't believe that you are the successor of the demon court, but your soul does not belong to this world. You have the aura of the origin world, but it is not pure. I also know that everything you have today cannot be separated from some special existence. Incubus's words were very natural, but Lin Yuan vaguely felt that it had some kind of incredible magical power. That was because Li Zhong's face did not show any surprise when such terrifying news came from its mouth. Suddenly, Lin Yuan had an absurd thought. It seemed that the omnipotent system did not even hear its words. Only you and I can hear what I am going to say next. In order to not be noticed by some special existence, you only need to listen. Don't show anything strange on your face. First of all, I have to congratulate you for successfully deceiving the rules of this world. Other than an extremely special existence like me, or a powerful person who has already deduced your roots, no one will be able to see your origin. That is because the intricate karma on your body has already covered your soul, which is incompatible with this world. But you don't have to be happy because your origin is a hidden danger that must be eliminated for some existence, especially the things on the other side of the divine gate that they mentioned. They will covet you even more because they want to find the origin world even in their dreams. Because you come from the origin world, I will not say any more nonsense. Whether it is me, the inheritance of this world, or the things on the other side of the divine gate, they all come from a place that you know, the chaos. Incubus still maintained a calm attitude when it said these words. But Lin Yuan, who heard these words, had to try his best to suppress the excitement in his heart so that he would not show anything strange. The chaos. That was the origin of everything. Any creature from there was an immortal myth. If everything was related to the chaos, then the way back to the past world could indeed be found through the divine gate. The timeline of my ancestors was the first cultivation tribulation of the chaos. The so-called war between the three races was the battle between the dragons, phoenixes, and Kirin. However, the final winner of that war was not the demonic beasts of the three races, nor was it the Luo Ho who appeared out of nowhere. It was the old man, Hong Jun. After that war, Hong Jun took control of the Way of Heaven. Nominally, he rewarded and punished all the existences who participated in that cultivation tribulation, but his purpose was just to steal the Way of Heaven. After Hong Jun obtained the great merits and was canonized as a sage, the chaos became his sole authority. The so-called 6 sages had to respectfully address Hong Jun as their teacher. Those who did not obey him would never have the chance to become a sage. After that, it was the second cultivation tribulation, which was the war between the shamans and the demons. It started with ancestor sorcerer Gonggong knocking down Mount Buzhou. Then, the 7 sages, including Hong Jun, used various means to mend the heavens. After that, the war between the shamans and the demons broke out. But the real purpose was just to deceive the public. We once again shattered the chaos world, mixed our bloodline with the fragments of the world, escaped into the void, and escaped from Hong Jun's enslavement. In order to live freely, too many of our ancestors have sacrificed themselves. In the past few years, we have also been hunted down countless times by Hong Jun's lackeys. I don't know how our compatriots who have escaped to other places are doing, but the Sky Martial continent where our race is located can be considered to be in imminent danger. However, the heavenly divination, one of them escaped. Even Hong Jun, who stole the heavenly Tao, could not control everything. I don't know when it started, but an unknown force shrouded this world, making it difficult for Hong Jun to infiltrate the Tianwu continent. And after these years of reproduction, that unknown force started to act strangely. I couldn't find a result no matter how much I tried. It was until you appeared that I was sure that the force was related to you. Although I don't have any evidence, I can be sure that the force that isolated Hong Jun came from the source world. And you are the destined person to face the tribulation. Sooner or later, you will return to the chaos world and push Hong Jun down from his throne. Incubus's voice still did not reveal any joy or sadness. Lin Yuan looked at Incubus quietly. He wanted to say something several times but stopped himself. There was no other reason. Incubus's words had a huge impact on him. It was as if all the myths he knew had been overturned. But Incubus's words did not seem to be baseless. Because after Hong Jun became a sage, the so-called 6 sages had to respectfully address him as teacher. Chapter 525. The races that once dominated the untainted land did not rise again after the Great War of the 3 races. After the Great War of the witches and demons shattered the untainted land, the old forces were almost completely wiped out. Only then did the weak human race become the hegemon, giving rise to a series of subsequent myths and legends. The human race was originally a race created by Nuwa. Strictly speaking, they were inextricably linked to Hong Jun. Autumn beans fell. Lin Yuan adjusted his breathing and began to sort out the huge amount of information in Incubus's words. So my system is actually the so-called power of the source world, which is one of the powers that Hong Jun has yet to control? If I follow this train of thought, then the 3rd cataclysm of the untainted land, which is the battle between the sages, is also a conspiracy. Is the heaven that the founder of Tong Tian who teaches everyone without discrimination actually the original heavenly Tao? Because the founder of Tong Tian was unwilling to be controlled by Hong Jun, the 3rd cataclysm shattered the untainted land, causing the so-called source world to escape with the fragments. And the founder of Tongtian's subordinates were mostly demons, who were basically the remnants of the old forces. Because in the 2nd cataclysm, the witches and demons broke away from Hongjuan's control by shattering the untainted land. Even though they were constantly being hunted down by Hong Jun, the heavenly Tao that was about to be completely controlled by Hong Jun saw the hope of survival. Hiss. If not for the fact that he had to maintain a calm appearance, Lin Yuan would have gasped at this moment. However, the so-called 3rd cataclysm was definitely not something that Incubus and the other demons who had escaped during the 2nd cataclysm knew about. No wonder the science and technology on Earth had developed rapidly. The so-called metaphysics, ghosts and gods had always been listed as feudal superstitions. Even the so-called untainted land was listed as an unverifiable myth. Even the history of Huaxia, which had been passed down for more than 5,000 years, stopped at the Zhou dynasty. Even if everyone knew about the existence of the untainted land, no one could find any evidence. This was the heavenly Tao of the source world. It was erasing Hongjuan's existence, ensuring that Hong Jun would not be able to discover the source world. From Lin Yuan's memories of the original world, it seemed that the way of heaven had already done quite well in this aspect. Furthermore, it had even begun to fight against Hong Jun and the primordial world. The old forces such as Ravenhill Manor and the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas had actually already established a connection with the source world. However, not many people knew about it, and Lin Yuan, an anomaly from the source world, was one of them. In that case, what exactly was his system? The will of the heavenly Tao of the source world? If he thought about it this way, it did not seem impossible. The system had disguised itself well, and it was indeed no different from the systems in novels. However, it obviously had its own will and judgment, and it seemed that there was nothing it could not do or not know. Other than the reasonable explanation that it was the way of heaven, even an advanced alien civilization was not enough to prove that it was magical. This was because it was not making Lin Yuan stronger or giving Lin Yuan wealth. Its every action could only be explained by miracles. It was molding itself into a powerful god, a god comparable to Hong Jun, but it did not want itself to be out of control. Therefore, the system directly labeled the talent of the nether realm's black water as dangerous and uncontrollable. If Lin Yuan became stronger through the power of the nether realm's black water and became a god who controlled the underworld, then Lin Yuan would no longer be controlled. This was because Lin Yuan was not created by the system. It could not deprive Lin Yuan of his own power. Lin Yuan suddenly thought of the dove snake that had tried to devour the system's power. No wonder the system had changed its usual behavior and destroyed it directly. Based on this information, wasn't Hong Jun also a dove snake? However, Hong Jun had already succeeded. Out of the 50 great paths, Hong Jun had already grasped 4 out of 9. If he controlled the last one, Hong Jun would no longer be a saint and would no longer need to hold the title of the Way of Heaven spokesperson. Because at that time, Hong Jun would be the Way of Heaven. But why was he the one who was chosen? With his own strength, how could he challenge the legendary mighty Hong Jun? Even if he could defeat Hong Jun, would the Way of Heaven allow a second Hong Jun to appear? At that time, what would be the outcome waiting for him? Complex thoughts appeared in Lin Yuan's mind. It was only at this time that Lin Yuan dared to think like this. Ink Abyss was now using a secret technique to block the system's perception. If it was under normal circumstances, these thoughts that might be the truth would be enough for the system to directly erase Lin Yuan's existence. It seems that you have thought of a lot. That's right, you are a smart guy. It doesn't matter whether you are intentional or not. In any case, you will get the same information. Ink Abyss still had an emotionless expression as it slowly said, I am not telling you this for benefits. I simply do not wish for a situation like Hong Jun's to happen. You, Hong Jun, and the Source World. The 3 of you are in a tripartite situation. Only then will there be room for us remnants of the old era to survive. Otherwise, our fates will be extremely miserable. Ink Abyss's thoughts were very dark, but it was very similar to the experiences of its ancestors. Since the beginning of the primordial age, the best time for these old powers was before the war between the 3 races. Whether it was the heavenly Tao that instigated the war, or Hong Jun who later plucked the peach, they all saw clearly that the only one in this world they could truly trust was themselves. Now, the Source World had pushed Lin Yuan to compete with Hong Jun. If Lin Yuan could have his own strength, then the 3 parties would form a situation of checks and balances. Only in this situation would they have room to survive. Alright, it has been too long. I should leave. If this continues, it will notice. Ink Abyss lowered its head slightly and said in a low voice, in short, I do not ask you to remember my feelings. However, in my opinion, Hong Jun and the Source World have their own plans. You are just like us, a sacrifice. Only if you live can we live. From now on, your every move must be carefully considered. Don't easily fall into a trap. When its voice fell, Lin Yuan only felt his vision blur. When he regained consciousness, Ink Abyss had already disappeared. Only the worried-looking Li Zhong was standing beside him. Lord Dragon King, is what it said true? Li Zhong suddenly asked, causing Lin Yuan to be slightly startled. Could it be that Ink Abyss's secret technique had failed? Did that mean that the system and Li Zhong had heard everything? No, it couldn't be like that. If the system heard these words, there was a 90% chance that the system, which seemed to be the heavenly Tao, would erase his existence. What do you think? Lin Yuan looked at Li Zhong strangely and opened his mouth to swindle him. Chapter 526. The Jade Lake Immortal Palace's public offering of the elixir of immortality might not be able to attract the truly top-notch experts, but the vast majority of middle and low-level cultivators will try their luck. The Jade Lake Immortal Palace, in particular, will let those successful immortals appear and speak. This will undoubtedly greatly increase their credibility. In a short period of time, the Jade Lake Immortal Palace will gather a large number of middle and low-level cultivators to shake the entire situation. At this point, Li Zhong smiled bitterly and shook his head. He said bitterly, the cultivators who take the elixir of immortality will turn into sky demon. They can indeed obtain immortal life, but they will become a sky demon without self. What's the difference between this and direct death? Li Zhong's words made Lin Yuan let out a long breath of turbid air. Clearly, the previous conversation, which was neither long nor short, was not detected by the system. The effect of the secret technique was still present. What Li Zhong and the system heard was another conversation. What made Lin Yuan most excited was that before the incubus left, it left behind a final sentence. Although I don't know how you communicated with the origin before, it has no physical body and can only listen to the voices in other people's hearts. Therefore, I used a secret technique to conceal your thoughts. No matter who it is, no one will be able to wantonly detect your thoughts, unless you wanted to hear them. This secret technique that the incubus had paid an unknown price to set up was Lin Yuan's second greatest gain in the past year of being a demon beast. It was comparable to the Nether Realm's black water talent that the dragonization root of unknown origin had brought to Lin Yuan. It doesn't matter. It's just middle and low-level cultivators. The true experts have already seen countless outstanding people fall in the long river of time. They won't believe that the elixir of immortality really exists in this world. Even if it's true, they won't try it. Lin Yuan softly spat out his snake tongue and said with a gloomy gaze, "The world's cultivators seek nothing more than strength and melting, but they can't avoid immortality. However, what they seek is their own immortality, not the immortality given by others." Ah. Li Zhong raised his head in confusion. Death is a very interesting thing. Human warriors like to engage in life and death battles with others, dancing between life and death. This way, they can become even more powerful existences. Fighting with humans, fighting with demonic beasts, they are all pursuing death. They are seeking for a breakthrough in that slim chance of survival. Therefore, what makes cultivators move forward is not cultivation, but death. If they want to pursue immortality, they won't resist the existence of death, because the latter is the best medicine to spur them forward. If immortality can be obtained easily, then what's the point of cultivation? Lin Yuan smiled indifferently and joked, "A bunch of trash who don't know how to cultivate. No matter how many of them there are, they are still trash." Cultivation was a very difficult thing. Without the help of external forces, every realm was a ladder to the heavens. Lin Yuan's own cultivation was like this, and the northern frontier's cultivators under his command were also like this. Lin Yuan had never understood why those who were loyal to him could increase their strength so quickly. For example, Li Zhongsheng, as a member of Shen Lin Jun's reserve force, although Li Zhongsheng was an outstanding person, he was definitely not a monster. However, ever since he came to the northern frontier, Li Zhongsheng had grown rapidly. Now, he had become one of the top generals in the northern frontier, far surpassing those Shen Lin Jun's reserve force who were in the same batch as him. The speed of cultivation could be explained. After all, Lin Yuan was now the largest spiritual item merchant in the Tianwu continent. His subordinates could naturally obtain more and better spiritual items. With the advantage of a huge amount of resources, the northern frontier's cultivators could grow much faster than others. Using spiritual items to increase one's cultivation was not a problem, but spiritual items would not directly increase one's combat strength and combat experience. However, after the northern frontier's cultivators' strength soared, they could quickly grasp the combat strength of their own realm. They were even more powerful than those unorthodox cultivators. There was also the sudden exposure of the northern frontier's aristocratic families and Kong Lezin's secret operation, and the sudden disappearance of the northern frontier's sections. These were all unsolved mysteries in Lin Yuan's heart. Until today, Lin Yuan finally got the answer. Because he had the help of heaven. He had the origin of heavenly Tao behind him. Naturally, everything went smoothly, and the speed of his subordinate's strength was naturally rapid. After all, the strong enemy he had to face was not the Shenwu dynasty or those top forces, but a saint who had stolen the heavenly Tao. Lin Yuan's own strength could not increase slowly, and the existence of his subordinates naturally could not drag him down. Therefore, the entire northern frontier had the heavenly Tao behind him. Naturally, the speed of his growth was not something that ordinary people could compare to. What do you mean? Li Zhong seemed to have just reacted. He looked at Lin Yuan with a respectful expression. Withdraw all the spies in the south. If they want to cause trouble, let them cause trouble. Lin Yuan stretched his body and sneered. Originally, I had to make a trip to the West Sea Dragon Palace to clean up the mess for those evil cultists. However, Lei Qiusheng's move to divert the trouble has saved me a lot of trouble. Just wait, those evil cultists are not people who are willing to suffer losses. They have inexplicably taken the blame, and will definitely fight to the death with Lei Qiusheng. Our luck is pretty good. It's all thanks to Lord Dragon King's plan. Li Zhong flattered Lin Yuan neither lightly nor heavily. In fact, in his opinion, everything that happened today was calculated by Lin Yuan in advance. It was just that Lei Qiusheng and Lin Yuan had schemed against each other, and in the end, neither of them had gained much advantage. However, to the northern frontier, not suffering losses was a victory, because the northern frontier was not the one who had to clean up the mess. In the end, Lin Yuan was still better. He could not figure out why Lin Yuan would attribute all of this to illusory luck. If you want to change the plan, how should we deal with the Frost Mirror Cavalry? Li Zhong saw that Lin Yuan had the intention to leave, so he quickened his pace to catch up with him and asked in a low voice. Lin Yuan glanced at Li Zhong and chuckled. Zhang Xiuzhu has already started, and those graduates of the Northern Frontier Military Academy will not watch their classmates rise without doing anything. Since they are willing to do this troublesome thing, then let the Frost Mirror Cavalry and Shenlin Jun's reserve troops be the first bones for them to make a name for themselves. Zhang Xiuzhu's move to defeat Shenlin Jun's reserve troops had actually gone against Lin Yuan's original intention, forcing him to change the plan. Since things had already come to this point, he would not force it. Before he had enough strength, he could only follow the will of the heavens. Now, he only hoped that the Sky Demon Army could give him enough help so that he could get rid of this puppet status as soon as possible. At the very least, he had to have enough strength to wrestle with him before the system reacted, so that he would not have everything taken away from him in an instant. Chapter 527. They're here. Zhang Xiuzhu, who was half squatting on the ground, slowly stood up and tightened his right hand on the handle of his gun. He then growled, "Prepare for battle." Countless footsteps were heard. It was as if the entire ground was trembling under the charge of an unknown number of enemy troops. He knew that he shouldn't have fought this battle. Shenlin Jun's reserve forces had set up ambushes on the road from the defensive line of Donglin City to the Frost Mirror Cavalry camp. There was almost no better situation than this for the entire northern frontier. A few charges and hundreds of lives would have been lost, and they would have been able to return to the defensive line of Donglin City. They would have been able to use the mouths of those Frost Mirror Cavalry generals to direct their hatred to the Shenwu dynasty. However, everyone had their own selfish motives. Zhang Xiuzhu knew very well that this was the biggest opportunity he had so far. As long as he could win this battle, he would be able to make a name for himself. When the punishment from the king's residence at the northern frontier came, he would not be killed no matter what. There were only two possible outcomes. The first would be to lead the army to wipe out the Frost Mirror Cavalry and Shenlin Jun's reserve forces that were spreading throughout the northern territory. The second would be to remove him from the southern expedition and have him form a new army to defend the border. He would have to suffer the consequences of not being able to kill the Shuangjin dynasty. Clang! Clang! The elite soldiers behind the fortifications quickly got up and aimed their strange-looking crossbows at the charging enemy troops. They then pulled the trigger. One deadly bolt after another was fired. It took only an instant for nearly 10,000 bolts to take down a large number of enemy troops. As expected, the soldiers from Shenlin Jun's reserve forces removed all identifiable symbols from their bodies and wore only white undergarments. Without armor, there was no way they could have withstood the bolts with just a few layers of cloth and their bodies. Furthermore, the crossbows in their hands were anything but ordinary. Those were repeating crossbows that had been painstakingly researched by the Ministry of Works of the Northern region, capable of firing all 30 bolts stored in the crossbow box within a single second. Even sturdy armor might not have been able to withstand 30 consecutive shots. Even the airborne realm warriors, who were shielding their bodies with spiritual chi, ended up with blood splattering all over their bodies. However, this kind of crossbow could be said to be a single-use item. Without a special method, it was impossible to remove the crossbow case. Forcibly removing the crossbow case would only cause part of the mechanism to self-destruct, and the entire crossbow would be destroyed. On the fierce battlefield, without enough logistical support, the emptied crossbows could only be thrown aside, waiting to be picked up when the battlefield was cleaned up to see if they could be used again. Zhang Xiuzhu had emptied all the crossbows he had brought with him in the first round of attacks. He did not consider the problem of suppressing the enemy after that. He wanted to deal the greatest blow when the enemy was unprepared. As it turned out, Zhang Xiuzhu's crazy strategy was indeed successful. After a round of firing, at least 800 of the enemy troops at the front were killed on the spot, and the number of those who were crippled and seriously injured was uncountable. Archers, change your equipment. The shooting position must be used again within 5 breaths. Zhang Xiuzhu called out. Then, he waved his hand and growled, "Swordsmen and shield bearers, what are you waiting for? Do you have to suffer another round of attacks before you know how to build a second defensive position with shields?" In a team of more than 2,000 people, there was no need for semaphore or heralds. With Zhang Xiuzhu's cultivation level close to the heaven's strength realm, he could make all the soldiers hear his orders with his voice alone. However, Zhang Xiuzhu's command was not slow. How could the enemy, as the most elite soldiers of the Shenwu dynasty, be easy to deal with? Almost at the same time Zhang Xiuzhu opened his mouth, a black rain of arrows shot out from the dense forest. Moreover, this attack was an indiscriminate attack. Not only did Zhang Xiuzhu and the others' defensive position, but even the wounded soldiers lying on the ground outside were also enveloped by this rain of arrows. Between soldiers, relationships were very important. Putting aside the fact that they ate and lived together, if they were injured or killed in battle, having 2 more brothers would increase their chances of survival. At the very least, they could ensure that their corpses would be sent back to their hometowns and return to their roots. Therefore, the moment he realized that the enemy was attacking, Zhang Xiuzhu originally wanted to order the whole army to press forward and temporarily abandon the defensive position to stay with the wounded soldiers outside. However, the enemy's abnormal attack made Zhang Xiuzhu stunned for a moment. He could only helplessly accept this loss. He waved his long spear and swept away the arrows that were shot at him. He no longer had the leisure to take care of his other comrades. At the same time, Zhang Xiuzhu became more and more certain that this Shenlin Jun reserve army had reached a stage of desperation. Now, other than killing all the enemies and taking away the supplies for a meal, they did not have any other thoughts. They also did not care about the friendship between comrades. They did not have any food or medicine. Therefore, from the beginning, these wounded soldiers were treated as dead people by them. Puff! In the blink of an eye, a sharp arrow shot into Zhang Xiuzhu's shoulder. Zhang Xiuzhu staggered back 2 steps. He glanced at the soldiers who were in a daze and roared, "Swordsmen and shield soldiers, withstand the arrow rain and build a defensive position. Archers, quickly get into position and prepare to counterattack." What the hell are you waiting for? Are you waiting for the enemy to finish shooting? Before the 2 sides engaged in hand-to-hand combat, the archers on both sides usually shot at each other. In fact, who was at a disadvantage and who was at an advantage, actually depended on the shooting accuracy and shooting frequency of the 2 troops. If they could suppress the enemy behind the defensive fortifications and not dare to show their heads, they could almost achieve 0 casualties and cause a very terrible blow to the enemy. But what were his subordinates doing? Hiding behind the supply wagons and trembling? Strictly speaking, compared to the elite troops of the southern expedition, Shenlin Jun's reserve troops had only practiced a few more times and their general cultivation was higher. However, their battlefield experience was not as good as the soldiers of the southern expedition. However, in this first round of combat, the gap between the 2 sides immediately became obvious. The reason for this was very complicated. The most obvious reason was that Zhang Xiuzhu lacked reputation and military achievements. Even if Zhang Xiuzhu stirred up the morale of the whole army, he himself was just a team leader of the southern expedition. If it were not for Li Zhongxing's favor, many of the people present would have higher military ranks than Zhang Xiuzhu. Moreover, Zhang Xiuzhu had done almost nothing before except for his good performance in the military academy of the northern frontier. On the other hand, even if the opponent was only a reserve soldier, he was still a reserve soldier of the first army of the Shenwu dynasty. When the two sides met, the gap in confidence between the two sides was obvious. Although the morale of one side was low, there was no way to retreat. They could only fight with all their might. Their morale was indeed good, but they did not have the confidence to win. Therefore, the moment they made a mistake, it was easy to be beaten like an ostrich. Chapter 528. A pair of sharp eagle eyes lit up. Xiao En quietly watched the battlefield 3 kilometers away, the corners of his mouth slightly raised. This motley crew of southern expedition actually had the guts to challenge Shen Lin Jun's reserves. This was something that Xiao En couldn't figure out. What he couldn't figure out even more was why Zhang Xiuzhu's overconfident behavior could attract the attention of the Dragon King. Dragon King even asked him to personally lead the troops to back up this young general. Furthermore, Dragon King also asked him not to intervene in the battle before the other side completely collapsed. This was to let this guy suffer a big loss, but at the same time, to protect him from death. It seemed that Dragon King intended to put this young general in an important position. Xiao En's eyes flashed. He reached out and pressed down on the composite bow raised by a guard beside him. He gently shook his head and said, "Now is not the time for us to enter the game. Let's see what other countermeasures he has." He didn't believe that the general favored by the Dragon King was just an embroidered pillow. After all, Lin Yuan's vision had always been good. As long as someone was personally appointed by him to a certain position, they would be able to do their job with ease. Occasionally, they would even be able to create some unexpected surprises. The personal guard helplessly put down the composite bow in his hand and smiled bitterly. "Big brother, you saw it too. That troop was beaten so badly that they couldn't even raise their heads in the first round. According to the fighting rhythm of the archers, if they can't organize an effective resistance to suppress the enemy's offensive within 5 minutes, they will all be shot into sieves." Xiao En's troops were almost all of the Tree Elf tribe's demi-human warriors. As Lin Yuan's most proficient archers, the experience of these tree elves told them that the friendly forces at the front had completely collapsed. If they couldn't stop the effective resistance in time and suppress the enemy, then they could only find an opportunity to abandon a portion of their troops and retreat. In that case, it would only be a matter of how much they would lose. But if these guys continued to hide there recklessly, once Shen Lin Jun's reserves in the jungle attacked them, they would probably be completely wiped out. Thinking of this, the guard helplessly nudged Xiao En with his shoulder and said, "Big brother, we are all brothers. Tell me, do you have a grudge against that guy who is leading the troops? As long as you nod, we will find an opportunity to kill him with an arrow. It's better than the friendly forces at the front being completely wiped out." "Pa!" Xiao En slapped the guard on the back of his head and said fiercely, "Dragon King's order, before the friendly forces at the front are completely defeated, not to intervene in the battle situation. Do you want me to violate the order?" Speaking of this, Xiao En paused, and the light in his eyes flickered. He chuckled and said, "Besides, you also know that this troop still has the opportunity to counterattack and even seize the initiative, which means that they haven't completely collapsed. Before that, you stay here obediently and don't act rashly. Otherwise, if the Dragon King is angry, no one will be able to save our heads." The personal guard grimaced and rubbed the back of his head. However, his face was filled with an unconvinced expression. He said in a deep voice, "Then I will see if Big Brother is wrong. However, I will say this first. If I am wrong, I will do whatever Big Brother says in the future. Even if you want me to die, I will not frown. But Big Brother, if you are wrong, you will have to give me a troop and let me lead the troops alone." In his opinion, whether it was stealth or archery, he was better than his big brother. And his big brother's advantage was only that he had joined the Dragon King's service earlier. Towards the Dragon King whom he had never met, he was even more, like a loyal dog. He had no doubt that if the Dragon King wanted his big brother to die, his big brother would not even frown. Even the general in front of him who was beaten to the point of being unable to fight back had a better future than his big brother in his eyes. After all, the northern frontier was surging like a storm. In such a situation, only wild wolves could have a bright future. And a loyal dog like his big brother who only knew how to wag its tail and beg for mercy, other than getting some leftovers, would sooner or later be eaten by the wolves. Xiao En was silent for a moment. His complicated gaze lingered on the guard for a moment before he nodded gently. He was clear about his younger brother's thoughts, but he was even more clear about the Dragon King's temperament. Obediently following the Dragon King, as long as the Dragon King gave him something and did not fight for what he wanted, he could live for a long time and protect the legacy of his bloodline. As for those who disobeyed the Dragon King, even if they could be put in an important position for a while, in the end, they would only end up in a situation where the cunning rabbit was killed and the lackey cooked. He was different from his younger brother, or it could be said that he was different now. Xiao En, who had been captured and enslaved by the humans in the early years, had lost most of his wild nature. Xiao En valued the survival of the entire tree elf tribe more than his own future, so he was willing to be a loyal dog. As for his younger brother, although Xiao En did not mind letting him roam his own world, he still needed more training. He did not ask for him to become outstanding, but at least he did not want to bring disaster to the entire tribe. On the other side, Zhang Xiuzhu frowned slightly, his face gloomy to the extreme. He was very clear that the enemy's close combat troops were about to approach. If he could not set up an effective firing position, the entire army would be wiped out. Even if he was lucky enough to survive, this defeat would be nailed to the pillar of shame. Not to mention leading an army in the future, even the southern expedition would not tolerate a guy like him who only knew how to talk on paper. I'll say it one last time, prepare to counterattack. Those who disobey will have their entire family wiped out. Zhang Xiuzhu threw away the spear in his hand and rolled away to avoid a cluster of arrows. He then picked up a bow from a corpse. His movements were as quick and violent as a cheetah. He drew his bow and shot 3 arrows in a row. Suddenly, several muffled groans resounded in the jungle. At this moment, Zhang Xiuzhu completely forgot about the demeanor of a scholarly general. He, who did not have any achievements or glory, did not need those superficial things. If he wanted these soldiers to listen to him obediently, he must let them know what fear was, and what the consequences of disobeying orders were. Stop King pretending to be dead. Stand up and counterattack. Otherwise, we will all die here. Yu Dingshan, who was also struggling to resist the rain of arrows, wiped the sweat off his forehead, and picked up a trembling soldier. Then, he swung the sharp blade in his hand and chopped off a big head in an instant. He sneered, "Everyone here knows that I am an Imperial Guard, and you all know that your name and background information have been recorded by us. Do I need to repeat the consequences of disobeying orders?" Chapter 529. Yu Dingshan did not come from a military background, so he was unfamiliar with how to boost morale. He did not know what to do next. However, as the Qianhu of the Imperial Guards, Yu Dingshan's mentality resonated with Zhang Xiuzhu's to a certain extent. Furthermore, he knew that if the situation continued to deteriorate, all of them would die. As such, he immediately cheered himself up and began to supervise Zhang Xiuzhu. There was no need to mention the status of the Imperial Guards and the Demon Emperor's association in the northern frontier. They were ruthless people who could kill an entire family with a single thought. Furthermore, the more they went against such organizations, the more dirt they would dig out, and the more gruesome their deaths would be. More people would be implicated. Now that Li Zhongxing's favorite student had gone all out and the Imperial Guards were helping him, the ostrich-like soldiers could no longer keep up the act. They began to tremble and began to follow Zhang Xiuzhu's orders to build a defensive line and prepare for a counterattack. Coupled with the experts who came out with Zhang Xiuzhu and the Knight General Frost, who had his wounds treated, they were able to rebuild the defensive line in just a few minutes. The two armies began to shoot at each other, fighting for the initiative. While Shenlin Jun's reserve troops had excellent shooting skills, the Southern Expedition's troops were well equipped. After seeing that their enemies were either killed or injured by their arrows, the morale of the Southern Expedition's troops was greatly boosted. They were able to suppress the reserve troops of the Southern Expedition in the jungle. After all, fighting was a physical activity, especially in such a life-and-death battle. If one had 10% of their strength, they would not dare to use only 90%. As such, the rhythm of shooting at each other only lasted for about 10 minutes. Even the airborne realm's soldiers were sweating profusely and panting as they sat on the ground. They no longer had the strength to draw their bows and knock their arrows. This was the time it took for the Southern Expedition soldiers to take turns to shoot at the enemy. Therefore, at this moment, almost 80% of the soldiers had completely lost their strength. Even if the enemy rushed in front of them, they did not have the ability to stand up and fight. As for the Shenlin-Jun reserves in the forest, they had not eaten properly for several days, so they did not have much physical strength left. How could they withstand this level of consumption? In this short 10 minutes, the first 3 minutes were still shooting at each other, but in the next 7 minutes, it was almost like the Southern Expedition was crazily shooting arrows into the forest. There was no sound for a long time. Zhang Xiuzhu was silent for a moment before he silently pulled out the arrow from his shoulder. He called for a medic to treat his wound. Feeling the burning pain in his shoulder, he grimaced and roared, "Brothers, do you see this? You guys aren't any worse than those scum. As long as you dare to fight with them, you will realize that dregs will always be dregs, and we are fierce tigers." All the soldiers looked at Zhang Xiuzhu in a daze. No one cheered, and no one echoed. It wasn't just because they didn't have the strength. It was also because Zhang Xiuzhu's decision was to use the lives of their entire families to threaten them into going to war. After all, only one of them would die in battle, and there would even be pensions for their families. However, once this military order was carried out by the imperial guards, the 3 tribes who feared war would no longer be just empty words. No one would like such a general, even if he led them to a battle that they could not win. No one would think about whether they were wrong, because this was the deep-rooted bad habit of human beings. "Medic, come forward and treat the wounds of our brothers. The rest of you, prepare to eat, then rest and recover your strength. Those who still have strength, come with me to see if there are any wounded soldiers who are still alive. Behead them and let them know the consequences of being our enemy." After the voice fell, Zhang Xiuzhu picked up his long spear again and stepped out of the camp. Although he had long been mentally prepared, he still felt a big difference when he was suddenly treated coldly by his own soldiers. Yu Dingxian sighed softly and quickly caught up with Zhang Xiuzhu. He reached out and patted him on the shoulder, and said in a deep voice, "I remember this saying is from the first lesson of the military academy. Although I am a layman, I don't think you did anything wrong. In that situation, if you gave up on these people and chose to break out, their families would have lost their sons, husbands, and fathers. It would be 100 times worse than now. I believe they will understand you sooner or later." "I know." Zhang Xiuzhu nodded slightly, and his eyes glowed again. He smiled and said, "Thank you for what you did before. If you didn't reveal your identity, they would still have ignored my words." He had long known what it meant to be merciful, not to say that all generals were cruel and bloodthirsty, but a cruel fact that all leaders had to accept. If you didn't have enough strength, background, and reputation to convince your soldiers that as long as they strictly followed your orders, they would be able to obtain the final victory, then, no matter how well you planned and how well you prepared, as long as the enemy found a flaw in your plan, the morale of your soldiers would drop, and they would become lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Those famous generals who could devise strategies and determine victory from thousands of miles away did indeed exist. However, they had earned their fame through countless battles. As the soul of an army, they only needed to tell their subordinates that victory was inevitable. Even if all the soldiers on the front lines were killed, the soldiers behind them would think that it was a necessary sacrifice before victory. Then, they would continue to charge forward and fight. The situation is settled. The light in Shaoan's eyes slowly faded, and his eyes returned to their original state. He smiled at the guard beside him. The guard waved his hand in annoyance, but he didn't say anything unpleasant. He didn't understand how the army that had been beaten by the enemy a moment ago, and didn't even dare to fight back, suddenly became fierce and defeated the enemy in the dense forest. "Pa! Pa!" Shaoan reached out and patted the guard's shoulder. He smiled and said, "I will continue to lead people here to clean up the enemy. You lead the cavalry and quickly bypass here. Go to the barracks at the other end of the dense forest and pass down the order. Let them launch a general attack." Be sure to kill all the Frost Mirror cavalry in the camp before sunrise tomorrow. In addition, remember to let them put on Shenlin Jun's reserve armor for the fallen brothers." He paused, and then slowly said, "I know you look down on me, and I'm too lazy to argue with you. I also know you want the opportunity to lead the army alone, and I can give it to you. But I hope you will use your brain more, and think about the consequences before you make a decision. Even if you don't think for yourself, you have to think for the people in the tribe, for your father, for your brothers and sisters." Chapter 530. After the battle ended, Zhang Shuzhu didn't press the attack. Instead, he used the excuse of correcting the troops to reject Mount Frost's request to depart immediately. After the battle, Zhang Shuzhu calmed down and thought about many things. The most important point was that the troops that were supposed to ambush them didn't show up at all. However, since they were patrolling nearby, they must have realized that there was a battle going on here. Yet, they didn't help. Obviously, they had received some special orders. Based on this, Zhang Shuzhu quickly realized that Dragon King was watching his every move. Even the casualties of this battle had been sent to the northern frontier through the intelligence agency. Since he had achieved his goal, Zhang Shuzhu didn't forget what his mission was. So, he stopped. It would take time to completely wipe out Mount Frost's cavalry, and he could only try his best to buy as much time as possible. Phew, after letting out a long breath, Zhang Shuzhu put his hands behind his head. His eyes shone with an obscure light. Yu Dingchen, who had changed into a white Kirin uniform, opened the tent flap and walked to Zhang Shuzhu's table. He put a bowl of steaming rice on it and said with a smile, "They said that you've been staying in your tent since you came back. You haven't even eaten. Now that you're the commander-in-chief, you can't fall here before the mission is completed." Zhang Shuzhu looked at the big bowl in front of him and squeezed out a stiff smile. He looked up at Yu Dingchen and asked, "Actually, I don't understand. As a Qinhu of the Imperial Guards, why did you give up the safety of the rear and willingly stay in the southern expedition as a pawn after delivering the order from the northern frontier king?" "Because the southern expedition is short of manpower." Yu Dingchen pulled a chair over and casually sat in front of Zhang Shuzhu. He smiled and said, "I'm a layman in the military, but you're also a spy. Do you know what it means to punish a Qinhu?" That was the most disliked position in the entire embroidered uniform guard, because once a criminal was caught, I would be in charge of interrogating them. If I couldn't get anything out of them, then all the blame would fall on me. Therefore, in order to ensure that I can keep my clothes and my life, I have to resort to any means. I have to be covered in blood every day. At this point, Yu Dingchen smiled and continued, "It's a pity that I managed to get something out of them. The credit belongs to the higher-ups and has nothing to do with me. And the benefits that the families of the prisoners sent over also belong to the Nanjing Discipline Commission and have nothing to do with me. I worked hard and got scolded. In the end, I didn't get anything good." Zhang Shuzhu didn't reply. Instead, he focused on eating, but his gaze stopped on Yu Dingchen's face. Yu Dingchen stretched and smiled. "Right now, there's war everywhere in the north. As long as you can risk losing your head and travel to various battlefields to deliver information, even if you're an unorganized spy of the embroidered uniform guard, you'll be promoted to Qinhu after the war is over. Those Qinhu who were originally on the same level as me can even become commanders and personally lead a guard. They'll become people with real power on the northern frontier. Only I am a Qinhu now, and I'll most likely still be a Qinhu after the war is over." As he said this, a hint of loneliness appeared in Yu Dingchen's eyes. To be able to quickly rise from the grassroots to become a Qinhu in the early days of the embroidered uniform guard, there was naturally no problem with Yu Dingchen's ability. It was just that he had offended some people and was assigned to a Qinhu with few benefits. Unless he handled some major case that alarmed the Dragon King, he would never have a chance to make a name for himself in this life. The entire embroidered uniform guard is in operation, and almost everyone has been sent out. That's why I was able to get this opportunity to go to Donglin City to deliver the decree of the king of the northern frontier. But what can this little merit do? That's why I don't want to go back. I want to stay on the southern expedition and continue to play my role in the following battles. When it's time to award merit, I want to be a commander. At this point, Yu Dingshan rubbed the tip of his nose and said with a smile, I just didn't expect that my first mission after joining the Southern Expedition Army would be to escort supplies with you and encounter such a dangerous situation. That's why I have to thank you. If you hadn't suddenly acted so ruthlessly, all of us would have died here. Then, you can come with me. Zhang Shouju swallowed the last grain of rice and looked at Yu Dingshan with shining eyes, as if he was looking at a rare treasure. Huh? Yu Dingshan raised his eyebrows again and looked at Zhang Shouju with a blank expression. Today, Zhang Shouju really wasn't a big shot in the Southern Expedition. Without any merit, even if he had Li Zhongxing's favor, he was just a team leader. Whether it was status or experience, he couldn't compare to a Qinhu of the embroidered uniform guard. But now, Zhang Shouju was asking him to follow him with a smile on his face. The king of the northern frontier and Dragon King should know about our every move today. After this battle, whether it's a reward or a punishment, I won't stay on the Southern Expedition's list anymore. I think the higher-ups will allocate a part of the Southern Expedition to form a new army for me. I don't know where I'll be assigned to, but I'll most likely replace Marshal Li's current position to build the Great Wall Project and guard the border. Since you can't make a name for yourself in the embroidered uniform guard, why don't you transfer to follow me? Zhang Shouju put the bowl back on the table and asked with a serious face. Yu Dingshan's expression changed several times. After a while, he slowly raised his eyelids and smiled bitterly. I think you overestimate me. I told you that I'm a complete layman in the military. If you want to entrust me with important tasks, I'm afraid it won't work. Tuck. 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 Zhang Shouju tapped his fingertips on the table and stared at Yu Dingshan. He said in a deep voice, when do you think the embroidered uniform guard and the Association of the Demon Emperor will have a winner? Even if one side doesn't die, at least there should be a male and female side, right? Yu Dingshan's breathing stopped slightly, and his eyes began to flicker. It wasn't a secret that the two major spy agencies in the northern frontier didn't get along, but other than Sherdong and Luo Su, no one dared to mention it openly. At most, they would fight openly and secretly. Therefore, Zhang Shouju's behavior could be described as crazy. If they can't be separated, even if they can be separated by force, the conflict will erupt again. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 100 years. Zhang Shouju abruptly stood up from his seat and said with a smile, I've always been bold, so I've decided to be bold again this time. But I need your help, as well as a group of professional spies to carry out this plan for me. Chapter 531. The next day, early in the morning, Zhang Shouju led the supply troops and set off once again. However, the troops that originally had more than 2,000 people had been reduced to less than 1,000 after the previous day's battle. Many of the supplies that had been sent over had been torn apart by arrows or sharp blades, causing their packaging to be scattered. Zhang Shouju and his men had no interest in picking up the dusty grains. After calculating the number of supplies left, they sent a group of sentries into the forest. After receiving a signal confirming that the convoy was safe, Zhang Shouju and his men escorted the convoy into the forest. The forest had been filled with danger yesterday, but it was empty today. I have a bad feeling about this. Keishua's eyes flashed with worry as he rode on his horse. It wasn't that he couldn't understand why Zhang Shouju wanted to rest for a night before setting off. After all, the convoy was already exhausted after the bloody battle. Moreover, in order to deal with Shen Lin Jun's reserve forces, Zhang Shouju had to abandon his persona and order the soldiers to fight. If he continued to ignore the soldiers' opinions and continued to transport the supplies, it was very likely that a mutiny would occur. Therefore, even the Frost Mirror cavalry didn't urge Zhang Shouju to set off. Although they weren't so tired that they didn't want to move, they were still exhausted. If there was a mutiny, they wouldn't even be able to run out of the simple fortifications. But for the entire night, Kaifan had felt uneasy, as if something big had happened. This uneasy feeling only turned into fear and confusion when Keishua and his men arrived at the original encampment of the Frost Mirror cavalry. This was because the place was already in a mess. There were mutilated corpses everywhere. Most of them were the corpses of the Shuangjin dynasty's cavalrymen and horses. The rest of the corpses weren't wearing any armor, just like the enemies they encountered in the forest. Moreover, the wounds on the corpses were clearly caused by the Shuangjin dynasty's scimitars. Kei Tan couldn't think of anyone other than Shenlin Jun, who was as famous as Shualiao cavalryman, who didn't wear an inch of armor and directly collided with the scimitars and hooves of the Frost Mirror cavalrymen. Moreover, he was able to achieve such a tragic result on both sides. Because they had never fought against the army of the northern frontier head-on, the only close contact they had was yesterday. He had witnessed with his own eyes how his team of over 2,000 was suppressed by the enemy's counterattack and couldn't even raise their heads in the fortifications. From that moment on, the northern frontier army had nothing to do with elites in Kei Ming's eyes. They were just a bunch of cowards with nothing but strength. Cowards didn't have the guts to charge into the Frost Mirror cavalry formation in such a state. Zhang Xiuzhu's eyes narrowed slightly. His voice was somewhat bitter as he said, "It seems that those fellows we met yesterday were not simply coveting the supplies we were escorting. Their initial goal was to block our path." But Kei Ting's voice was choked with emotion. Why? Although they hadn't counted all the corpses in the camp, a rough estimate put the total number of corpses on both sides at around 200,000 to 300,000. If they counted the men and horses that had died at the hands of the northern frontier army and the warriors that had been devoured by the demon beasts in the forest, even if there were still survivors, there would only be a few tens of thousands of them left. The number of tens of thousands was just wishful thinking on his part. It was obviously unrealistic to expect the Shuangjin dynasty to pay a huge price for an army that had been crippled or even destroyed. Yesterday, Kei Tan was still contemplating whether he should stand on the side of the Shualiao tribe or maintain his position and stand on the side of the allied army formed by the other tribes. However, the scene in front of him mercilessly slapped him in the face. Now, he had no choice. The Shuangjin dynasty has a strong military force. 500,000 cavalrymen won't be a serious injury to your dynasty, but the number of casualties will be divided among the tribes, which is still an unacceptable loss. Moreover, I can be sure that the cavalrymen that entered the northern frontier army were definitely the nobles of the Shuangjin dynasty. After all, in your opinion, compared to your old enemy, the Shenwu dynasty, even if our newly risen northern frontier army has unlimited potential in the future, it is just a soft persimmon that is easy to pinch and eat. Therefore, as long as they have the slightest bit of connections, they will join the troops that plunder the northern frontier army instead of running to the central plains to deal with the unpredictable Shenwu dynasty. Yu Dingshan didn't hide his words at all. His bloody tone revealed a bit of disdain as he said coldly, "I can see that the Shenwu dynasty army naturally won't turn a blind eye to this. Young chieftain, do you think that the tribes of your dynasty will just let the deaths of 500,000 Frost Mirror barbarian in the northern frontier army be? But we have already planned to negotiate for peace. There is no need, no need. Even if the leaders of those tribes are dissatisfied, they will give face to the Great Khan and won't start a war with the northern frontier army." Kei Zhuo seemed to find it hard to accept this fact. He shook his head bitterly and his voice was choked with sobs. Yu Dingshan sneered and added, "It is because there is no need that they deliberately did this. Shenlin Jun's reserve troops have been defeated by us. Unless the Shenwu dynasty has the ability to settle the trouble between the Qingjiang dynasty and you in an instant and send troops to the northern frontier army, it will be possible to bring these reserve troops back to the central plains. However, everyone, including themselves, knows that this is impossible, so..." Yu Dingshan's hesitant look successfully evoked Kei Zhuo's imagination. This was because he couldn't explain this matter too directly. Otherwise, Kei Zhuo would think that the northern frontier army was trying to frame the Shenwu dynasty. However, he couldn't directly say it, but Yu Dingshan could lead Kei Zhuo's thoughts in that direction through hints. These Shenlin Jun's reserve troops didn't believe that they had a way to survive. Therefore, the moment they lost Wei River City, they had already become the undead of the Shenwu dynasty. Although they weren't as miserable as the remnants of the Jiao clan in name, they were actually worse off. At least the remnants of the Jiao clan could still struggle on the line between life and death, but they didn't have the slightest bit of hope. Therefore, under such circumstances, they would do something even crazier than the remnants of the Jiao clan. For example, they would drag the 500,000 Frost Mirror cavalry down with them. Kei Zhuo was right. If both sides insisted on negotiating for peace, then this kind of action would be meaningless. However, the Frost Mirror Khan was already old and frail, and no longer had the heroic spirit he once had. Although he sat firmly on the throne of the Great Khan, everyone could see that the other tribes on the grasslands were eyeing the Bloodsill tribe covetously. Once that lion died, the entire Bloodsill tribe would be eaten up. Chapter 532. Under such circumstances, how much power did the so-called Frost Mirror Khan have to say anything? 500,000 nobles from the Shuangjin dynasty had died at the northern frontier. If most of the tribes were clamoring for war with the northern frontier, the Frost Mirror Khan would have no choice but to fight against Lin Yuan even if he didn't want to. Therefore, it was reasonable for the reserves of Shen Lin Jun to attack the Frost Mirror cavalry. As people who were doomed to die, trading one life for one life with the northern frontier was undoubtedly the best choice for them. Even though the Shen Lin Jun reserves weren't the ones who did this. Even though Zhang Xiuzhu and Yu Dingshan were both under the watch of Kai Yan and the others. However, at this critical juncture of the war, the cooperation between the Genie Guards and the Shifter Emperor was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. Therefore, they were very clear about what had happened here last night and who had died here. The Shen Lin Jun reserves that had been hiding in the forest last night were just a group of defeated soldiers who had accidentally wandered here. They were a very helpful chess piece to Lin Yuan's plan. However, Zhang Xiuzhu's determination to fight almost ruined Lin Yuan's plan. After all, if Zhang Xiuzhu really won, the supply troops would have no excuse to delay and would have no choice but to march forward. When the two sides met, the Frost Mirror cavalry would be full of energy after a full meal. They wouldn't even need to wait for the northern frontier to negotiate with the Shuangjin dynasty. They would be able to follow the route the supply troops took and meet up with the main force. Although the Shuangjin dynasty wouldn't have the guts to pay the northern frontier a little less ransom, if that happened, Lin Yuan's plan would fall apart. After all, a wolf that hadn't been beaten would still be eyeing the northern frontier covetously. The tribes that hadn't suffered a loss wouldn't ignore the Great Khan's order to make up for their losses. They wouldn't let their men rush into the central plains and the south of the Shenwu dynasty to plunder. Fortunately, Zhang Xiuzhu had overestimated himself. He had also overestimated this group of elites who had been honed on the battlefield. Zhang Xiuzhu had the advantage of striking only after the enemy had made the first move. Although he had barely defeated the enemy's greed for the supply troops, he had also lost the ability to continue marching. Because Kai Teng had personally experienced that battle, he knew that the performance during the battle was not something that could be achieved by putting on a show. Although the enemy in the forest did not reveal their identity, they had jumped straight to the point that they were werewolves. This was because in the north, there was only one army that dared to intercept the supply troops of the northern frontier and had sufficient combat power. The Frost Mirror cavalry that were restricted by the terrain could only defend the plains. They did not dare to enter the forest to fight. Therefore, a great path of survival was right beside them. They did not have the courage to explore it. They could only hide in the camp and wait for a slow death. Therefore, at this point in the show, as long as the defeated army was not captured alive by Kai Teng and his men, the Shen Lin Jun reserves would be like yellow mud falling into their pants. Even if it wasn't sh*t, it would still be sh*t. There was no need for Yu Dingshan and Zhang Xiuzhu to guide them. No matter what happened next, Kai Teng would lock the identity of the enemy as the Shen Lin Jun reserves. This was why the current scene was happening. At this moment, Kai Teng, who had been forced into a dead end, had a gloomy expression on his face. He directly placed his hatred on the Shen Lin Jun reserves. This was not because Zhang Xiuzhu's plan was good. It was because the enemy had given him a godly assist. It was as if the heavens were helping him. As for the survivors, that was even more impossible. Because the Shen Lin Jun reserves in the forest were not withdrawn at all. Last night, Xiao En and his tree elf guards sneaked into the camp and slit their throats with short knives. Not to mention leaving behind corpses, they even cleaned up the blood stains. After all, they were fighting in the forest at night. Even if the regular army of the Divine Forest Army came back, they wouldn't be able to compete with these demi-human warriors. This was especially true for the agile tree elves who were good at stealth and assassination. Because of Shaoan's outstanding performance, in the eyes of Kei Teng and the others, Zhang Xiuzhu had made a wrong inference from the beginning. The defeated Shenlin Jun reserves did not come for the military supplies at all. Their purpose was to occupy the forest and block the military supplies to buy time for their comrades who were fighting with the Frost Mirror Cavalry. After the mission was over, these Shenlin Jun reserves did not even collect the corpses and hurriedly retreated, leaving behind a mess on the ground. Kei Ting swallowed his saliva and gasped for breath. 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry. Even if they are not completely destroyed, the remaining ones are all defeated soldiers who have been scared out of their wits. So I think they don't know that we paid a high price to redeem them. What about you guys? After he finished speaking, the rest of the Frost Mirror Cavalry looked at each other and did not know what to say. As an envoy personally appointed by the Shuangjian dynasty, Kei Ting naturally stood on the side of the Shuai Liao tribe. However, these Frost Mirror Cavalry were originally the warriors of their own tribes. They came out specifically to see how the warriors of their own tribes were doing. But when they arrived at their destination, they suddenly realized that the 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry had all turned into cold corpses. For a moment, their faces flushed red, and they stuttered, not knowing what to say. After all, Kei Ting had two choices, but they only had one choice. Now that they were all dead, they did not even know what to say when they returned. However, they had to admit that the 500,000 Frost Mirror Cavalry was indeed not worth the price. Instead of spending a large amount of money to buy back a batch of incomplete corpses, it was better to save the 13th prince of the Shuai Liao tribe. That way, the Shuai Liao tribe would more or less compensate them. Stop hesitating. The veins on Kei Ting's forehead throbbed as he said fiercely, Shenlin Jun will not let go of any opportunity. If the 13th prince is killed by those bastards while you are hesitating, there is no need for us to go back. Let's just kill ourselves here. We don't want to drag the tribe down with us. I agree to take the 13th prince back. Seconded. Me too. After being yelled at by Kei Teng, the Frost Mirror Cavalry realized that they had no other choice. Although they really did not want the 13th prince, who was known as the #1 warrior of the Shuai Liao tribe, to return to the Shuai Liao tribe, they made the wise choice to save their own lives. After all, the 13th prince might not join forces with the 3rd prince after he returned. One of them was a scholar, while the other was a warrior. A ferocious wolf and a cunning fox would never walk side by side. When that time came, it would be time for their tribe to fight for the throne. Chapter 533. 10 minutes later. Shunning City, Northern Frontier Prince's Mansion. Li Zhong was flipping through a piece of paper that didn't have many words written on it. He gritted his teeth and felt a buzzing sound in his head. Because of the two outstanding Secret Service organizations, the Embroidered Uniform Guards and the Association of the Demon Emperor, although the flames of war had ignited in the entire Northern Territory, it didn't affect the efficiency of receiving intelligence from the rear at all. From the moment Zhang Xiuzhu wanted to arm wrestle with Shenlin Jun's reserve, every move on the field didn't escape Li Zhong's eyes. But intelligence was intelligence. The letter in Li Zhong's hand was personally delivered by Zhang Xiuzhu. The content was very simple and very bold. Because Zhang Xiuzhu wanted to establish the 3rd Secret Service organization in the Northern Frontier, the Military Intelligence Division, whose full name was the Military Intelligence Analysis Division. The Embroidered Uniform Guards had a very special position in the Northern Frontier. Because other than Luo Su, all the members of the Embroidered Uniform Guards were from the Association of the Demon Emperor. They were a secret service organization that was trained by Lin Yuan himself. Since they officially left the Association of the Demon Emperor, they carried the halo of personally appointed by the Dragon King. So in the eyes of the local government, they were an existence that had to be opened wide. Even the lowest level of Embroidered Uniform Guard's Secret Service agent had to be respectful to the local government. Because disrespecting them was equivalent to disrespecting the Dragon King. But not everyone would give face to the Embroidered Uniform Guards. For example, some of the Demon Emperor's guild with similar authority didn't like the Embroidered Uniform Guards. After all, the members of the embroidered uniform guards were all from the association of the Demon Emperor. Many of the Baihu and Xinhu who had real power in the association of the Demon Emperor were at the same level as the younger brothers. They had to smile and call everyone Big Brother when they saw them. With the sudden rise of the embroidered uniform guards, these younger brothers also became important figures in the northern frontier. This made the Demon Emperor's guild feel like their rice bowl was stolen. This was the reason why the two sides didn't deal with each other from the beginning. Furthermore, the stronger the embroidered uniform guards were, the weaker the Shifter Emperor's assembly's method of obtaining information would be. In the later stages, the Shifter Emperor's assembly would no longer have anything to do with the Shifter Emperor's assembly. Therefore, whether it was for power or profit, the association of Shifter Emperors and the embroidered uniform guards were like fire and water. The embroidered uniform guards had a halo, but so did the Shifter Emperors Association. After all, it was a faction personally supported by Lin Yuan. The Shifter Emperors Association had quite a bit of influence in the entire northern frontier. Even the local tyrants in the gray areas had to depend on the Shifter Emperors Association if they wanted to earn some money. It wasn't difficult for the local government to do something well, but to do it efficiently, they had to use the influence of these local tyrants. After all, in the special appointment system of officials in the northern frontier, there had always been flowing officials and officials made of iron. These officials with salaries and ranks were far inferior to the local government. If they weren't the local tyrants, they were the local tyrants' protection. Most of the time, they had more influence in the local government than their official counterparts. This was because they represented the Shifter Emperors Association. This was an unavoidable situation. After all, the term of an official wasn't long. It was obviously unrealistic to expect a new group of officials to govern the local government in an orderly manner from scratch. They could only rely on the officials to wisely manage their relationships with the local officials. Only by cooperating with both sides could the local government unleash the greatest power of the local government. Therefore, the Shifter Emperors Association, which wasn't considered an official faction, had the right to speak in the local government. This was why they had the confidence to compete with the embroidered uniform guards to see who was the leader of the Northern Frontier's special forces. In name, the embroidered uniform guards could trample on the Shifter Emperors Association. However, if the two sides completely fell out, the Shifter Emperors Association could instantly shut down most of the embroidered uniform guards' offices in the Northern Frontier. However, the embroidered uniform guards and the Northern Frontier's royal residents would have to settle the bloody accounts afterwards. However, whether it was the embroidered uniform guards or the Shifter Emperors Association, they obviously had nothing to do with the military system. Although according to the rules, the embroidered uniform guards could fill in the positions of the military officers. However, at the level of the embroidered uniform guards, they could easily get rich. If there were vacancies in the positions of the military officers who hadn't reached a certain level, the embroidered uniform guards wouldn't easily use their privileges. After all, Yu Dingshan was an exception. After all, being given priority to fill in the positions and having to fill in the positions were two different things. The privileges of the embroidered uniform guards only allowed them to compare with officers from ordinary backgrounds when they were promoted. If both of them had similar abilities and could adapt to the position, the embroidered uniform guards could directly take up the position. However, if they used their privileges, it would be equivalent to leaving the embroidered uniform guards. If they still continued to be associated with the embroidered uniform guards, Lin Yuan and Li Zhong wouldn't let them off easily. It would also temporarily cut off the chance for the embroidered uniform guards to gradually control the entire military officer system. Of course, although the two spy agencies weren't related to the military system, the military still had to accept the supervision of these two agencies when they didn't have their own spy forces. Furthermore, because they weren't on the same side, no one would be nice to the military officers. Therefore, the military had always hoped to form their own spy forces. However, other than Zhang Xiuzhu, who wasn't well known in the northern frontier, no military officer dared to suggest that the military establish their own intelligence agency because it was a taboo. After all, the military was the strongest force of a force. If such a department was allowed to supervise itself, it would only allow the military officers' power to expand infinitely. Sooner or later, there would be rebellions and rebellions. In addition, Luo Su and Sherdong were already badly beaten for power. The cake that they had now was not enough to eat. How could they allow a third spy agency to rise and take over the military system that they coveted but couldn't get their hands on? If such a thing really happened, Luo Su and Sherdong's first reaction would definitely not be to ignore the growth of this hidden danger. These two spy chiefs would immediately join hands to strangle the third party that was a threat to them in the cradle. They wouldn't leave a single chance. However, a triangle was always the most stable shape. Once the military intelligence agency was established, it would undoubtedly be the most suitable for Lin Yuan's main theme of checks and balances. Moreover, it would also free up a lot of manpower, so that the entire northern frontier wouldn't feel stretched for information transmission. Looking at the current embroidered uniform guards, because of this war, the only people who didn't have a mission in the whole shunning city were the typical scapegoats. The rest of the members were all running around day and night in the northern battlefield, trying to avoid contact with the enemy as much as possible. The previous Qinhu, Yu Dingchen, was from such a background. Except for these guys that even the embroidered uniform guards themselves didn't like, Li Zhong had to make an appointment in advance if he wanted to call two embroidered uniform guards to do something. Although it seemed that he knew the situation of the war like the back of his hand, only Li Zhong himself knew the pain. Without the supervision of the Association of the Demon Emperor and the embroidered uniform guards, the originally peaceful northern frontier was now a mess. If Lin Yuan and Boss Lin weren't in Shunning City, perhaps even the northern frontier would be in chaos. Chapter 534. It's a good idea, but it's a pity that it's too ambitious. Lin Yuan, who already knew the contents of the letter, sighed faintly and smiled. Actually, according to the original rhythm, Luo Su and Sherdong would definitely have a big battle. At that time, even a big shot like you wouldn't be able to avoid it, let alone other forces. The army wants to establish their own spy agency, not to seize power, but more to protect themselves. If it wasn't for this sudden war, Luo Su and Sherdong would already be like fire and water. Almost every day, there would be members of the other party's faction who would fall from grace. However, every crime was irrefutable, causing those who hadn't yet chosen a side to be in a state of panic. According to this rhythm, when the chess pieces in the hands of the big shots on both sides were used up, they would use that evidence in their hands to force the neutral party to choose a side. However, speaking of which, they were all top spy agencies in the northern frontier. How could the embroidered uniform guard not have what the Shifter Emperor Association had? The operation of choosing a side before being imprisoned was a common occurrence in the northern frontier. Actually, I think that Zhang Xiuju's idea is not bad. After all, the war has used too much power from the Shifter Emperor Association and the embroidered uniform guard. Now, we have even lost control of our own base. If it wasn't for Zhang Xiu's old subordinates supporting us, I don't know how many forces would have taken this opportunity to meddle in the northern frontier. However, if this continues, the situation will still go out of control. Therefore, I think that instead of letting the Shifter Emperor Association and the embroidered uniform guard continue to fight like this, it would be better to cultivate a third party. Firstly, it would free up some of the spy forces to return to the northern frontier. Secondly, it would also tell Luo Su and Sherdong that they can fight, but if they go overboard, the one who laughs in the end might not necessarily be one of them. However, Zhang Xiuju may have the ability, but his temperament is too bad. Now, he wants to prove himself too much and has even forgotten what it means to be unworthy of a position. If the Dragon King doesn't punish him, he will cause great trouble sooner or later. Li Zhong rubbed his chin and said solemnly, therefore, I believe that even if we want to nurture a third party, this power should not fall into the hands of Zhang Xiuju. According to what Lin Yuan had said in his previous life, Li Zhong should be a Virgo. He strives for perfection in everything and cannot tolerate the slightest flaw. Li Zhong had planned the battle plan against the entire Shuangjin dynasty a long time ago, and it had been carried out smoothly until the appearance of Zhang Xiuju. Although the results did not affect the plan at all, and even achieved a better result, Li Zhong could only say that it was due to luck. It could not be repeated again. If Zhang Xiuju's sudden change continued to happen, Li Zhong would be suspicious of all his plans. If Li Zhong had been the one to monopolize the power of this kind of unstable element, he would have definitely killed him. However, he did not have the final say in the northern frontier. He could only put forward his own opinions and wait for Lin Yuan's decision. I'm very curious. What makes you think that the military system does not have its own spy agency? Lin Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly as he said coldly, no matter when, the military is this king's most powerful fist to the outside world. The weapons in their hands will never be pointed at their own people. What **T military intelligence department, there is no need for it to exist. In the end, the original intention of this force was to deal with their own people. Zhang Xiuzhu also saw that you wanted a third party to appear, and that I would not make a move against him before I squeezed out all his value. He grasped this mentality and wanted to become an influential official in the northern frontier. Yes, the Dragon King is wise. Li Zhong trembled as he lowered his head, his face full of resentment. Zhang Xiuzhu's ambition was indeed a little inflated. To put it nicely, he was arrogant because of his talent. It was as if the northern frontier could not move without him. Therefore, no matter who it was, he could make changes at the last minute. All of his actions were to make himself famous and then become an influential figure in the northern frontier. He could even stand shoulder to shoulder with first-rate existences like Li Zhongsheng, Zhang Qilin, and Gao Buzhen. However, his little calculations naturally could not escape the eyes of Lin Yuan and Li Zhong. After all, he was a student who had just graduated not long ago. No matter how intelligent he was only an armchair strategist. Compared to existences like Li Zhong and Lin Yuan who had experienced great storms and waves, he was not just a little bit different. However, on this matter, Zhang Xiuzhu grasped Li Zhong's mentality perfectly. Because Li Zhong really did want to set up a third-party spy organization to check and balance Shi Dong and Luo Su, he would also have the intention to kill Zhang Xiuzhu, this ambitious existence. Whether it was Li Zhongxing who admired him or Lin Yuan who made the best use of him, neither of them would watch Li Zhong extinguish this future general. This feeling of being calculated inexplicably made Li Zhong feel annoyed. After a while, he suddenly raised his head and stared at Lin Yuan with his eyes wide open. The military system had its own spy organization. Why did he, the king of the northern frontier, not know about it at all? Do you want to ask why there is a third spy organization in the northern frontier? Why did no one, including you, know about it? Lin Yuan grinned and said, Luo Su knows. Don't look at how fiercely he and Shi Dong fight. Unlike Shi Dong, any of his actions have no disadvantages for the northern frontier. This is because he knows very well that fighting to the death with Shi Dong will not bring him any benefits. The crazier Shi Dong's actions are, the more stable the position of the embroidered uniform guard will be. After all, the first batch of members of the embroidered uniform guard and the third spy organization were personally trained by this king, so they can be considered students of the same generation. The embroidered uniform guard was an organization that Lin Yuan had created by imitating the Great Ming Empire's embroidered uniform guard in his previous life. Everyone knew of the embroidered uniform guard's fame, but they did not know that the Great Ming Empire had another force set up outside Liaodong Pass that made countless Mongolian tribes tremble in fear, Yi Bus Ho. This external scouting force was similar to the scouts that Lin Yuan knew of in his previous life. The requirements were very simple but also very difficult. Those who could go deep into the camp and scout could join Yi Bushu's team. It was said that at Yi Bushu's peak, they could even clearly investigate who the Mongolian Khans met in the camp and what they said. Then, the next day, a document would be sent to the emperor's desk. This special force that had outstanding military achievements in history but few people knew about was set up at the same time as the embroidered uniform guard. Yi Busho was not a member of the embroidered uniform guard. Although they were not as famous as the former, Yi Busho was not any worse than the embroidered uniform guard at its peak. Since Lin Yuan had set up the embroidered uniform guard, how could he forget about Yi Busho? So from the beginning, Lin Yuan did not mind Shi Dong fighting with Luo Su. Because in this kind of situation, a person's ambition would be completely exposed. And with Yi Bushu's existence, the two sides would never reach the point of fighting to the death. Chapter 535. Yi Balan, what do you think of Zhang Shuzhu? Lin Yuan suddenly opened his mouth and said something that made Li Zhong puzzled. Li Zhong's cultivation method was called Heaven's Sun Gazing at Aura, which was personally taught to him by Lin Yuan. The biggest difference with most of the cultivation methods in the world was that the limit of this cultivation method was not the void realm, but the cultivation conditions were more special. To cultivate this technique, one must have their own territory. Furthermore, one's cultivation base was tied to the prosperity of the territory. Li Zhong had no doubt that if the northern region became the only empire that unified the 7 empires, and he was able to govern the entire northern region in an orderly manner, then the cultivation base that the territory would give him would directly push him to a magical realm that he could not even imagine. However, the cultivator of this cultivation method could not be extraordinary, because all his cultivation was fake. For example, if the northern frontier unified the 7 dynasties, but all the creatures under his rule died, his cultivation would instantly fall to the level of an ordinary person. Even if there was a natural disaster or man-made disaster somewhere, he would be seriously injured and his cultivation would fall. Now the northern frontier had taken over the whole northern territory, and Li Zhong's cultivation had broken through the threshold of the Heaven Gang realm. Although he had not fought with others, but based on the feeling that the strong people in the northern frontier brought to him, all the cultivators who were weaker than Wine Sword Mystery could not bring any threat to him. After all, Wine Sword Mystery was at the peak of the Heaven Gang realm, and he had killed the existence of the late stage of Heaven Gang realm. In addition to the particularity of this cultivation method, Li Zhong's perception of the environment was extremely sharp. Even Luo Su and Shi Dong, who were the heads of the secret service who specialized in the cultivation method given by Lin Yuan, could not hide under his eyes. At present, the only one who could do this was the abandoned disciple of the Void Walker, Xia Xiu. With the talent of shadow affinity, he could blend into the shadow at any time to avoid Li Zhong's perception. He is a good seedling. All of a sudden, an unfamiliar voice sounded. Immediately, a sloppy man wearing black leather armor with long hair like withered grass that covered half of his face slowly appeared in front of Li Zhong. He bowed to Lin Yuan and continued, such a person should not have gone to the military academy of the northern frontier in the first place. It would have been better if he had come to my knight's acceptance for training. Then you can take him away. Lin Yuan glanced at the sloppy man and sneered. Since he wants to control the spy system of the army, this king will give him the chance. As for whether he has the ability or not, that is between you and him. Unremitting Night had been stationed on the Frost Mirror Plains ever since it was established. Their greatest enemy had never been the Northern rebels, and they didn't even have to do anything when the situation in the north changed. Their eyes had always been fixed on the Frost Mirror dynasty, and even the Great Wall project had been conceived by Yi Balan, the current division chief of Unremitting Night. Once the Great Wall was completed, Night would set up more outposts on the Frost Plain and train their own cavalry. Bit by bit, they would infiltrate the Shuangjin dynasty's military system and become Lin Yuan's poisonous fangs embedded in the Shuangjin dynasty, just like their predecessors in the other world had done to the Mongols. This kind of spy agency that was responsible for direct combat was the cruelest. If one wanted to become the leader of the entire wolf pack, he had to challenge his superiors again and again regardless of life and death. Only the strongest wolf could lead the entire tribe to hunt the strongest prey. The moment Zhang Shuzhu showed his ambition to Knight's acceptance, Yi Balan and Zhang Shuzhu would fight to the death. Of course, before that, he had to grow from a wolf cub to a wolf cub and then to an adult wolf with his own code name. Only then would he be qualified to challenge Yi Balan. Yi Balan nodded and stepped back, disappearing from Li Zhong's sight again. Deploy well. The Shinwu dynasty is coming. Remember, we can't lose this war. Neither I nor the northern frontier can afford to lose. Lin Yuan glanced at Li Zhong and calmly instructed before leaving the room. Li Zhong shrugged his shoulders helplessly. When it was rumored that Lin Yuan was the reincarnation of the ancient demon emperor, Li Zhong didn't believe it. After all, no one would believe that an organization that they had never heard of would appear out of nowhere. However, the attitude of the top forces towards Lin Yuan and the treasures that Lin Yuan could easily take out and throw on the market made Li Zhong believe in this point. Therefore, no matter what special techniques Lin Yuan's trump cards practiced, Li Zhong wouldn't feel the slightest bit strange. It would only make Li Zhong feel that Lin Yuan was becoming more and more unfathomable. Due to the war treasury's mechanism of randomly refreshing items, not only did Lin Yuan obtain the method to cultivate demonic power, but there were also many techniques suitable for humans and even mountain-shaking apes. Lin Yuan had exchanged for all of them. Li Zhong's Son of Heaven gazing technique had come from the war treasury. Although the sales of Fays had gradually decreased due to the saturation of the market, the low-grade techniques that Lin Yuan took out were not only the Northern Frontier Academy's entry-level manuals, but they were also treasures that the major forces didn't hesitate to spend a lot of money to obtain. The most outrageous thing was that Lin Yuan didn't have the slightest intention of only selling the techniques to one party. Every low-grade technique that he didn't like would be made into countless copies and sold to various places. It didn't matter if someone had bought the technique before. In order to learn it or to maintain the exclusivity, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce would rush forward and buy all the techniques that they felt were useful. Before meeting Lin Yuan, Li Zhong had never thought that simply printing and selling books could actually become a more profitable business than selling Fays. However, it was also because of the exchange of various cultivation methods that Lin Yuan squandered a lot of war points that he had accumulated. Therefore, he really wanted to win by hook or by crook in the face of this war, which was quite terrifying in terms of rewards and punishments. Because he simply couldn't afford to lose. With 0 war points, if he wanted to pay that terrifying punishment, he would probably be sucked dry in an instant. After leaving Li Zhong's range of perception, Lin Yuan swung his dragon tail and crushed a lump of black mud. He controlled his demonic power to sweep away the black mud one by one. Then, he lifted the letter full of code words and glanced at the contents. Suddenly, a trace of horror flashed past his eyes. 3 days ago, the Jade Lake Immortal Palace's palace master personally left for the Shuangjin dynasty. Her purpose was to meet the great Khan of the Shuangjin dynasty. A simple sentence, but it contained an incomparably terrifying amount of information. If dragons had sweat glands, Lin Yuan would probably be covered in cold sweat at this moment. Chapter 536. Who in the world wanted immortality the most? Without a doubt, it had to be the emperor. Enjoying the supreme power and the melting of the human world, no matter how heroic these emperors were when they were young, they were still afraid of death when they were old. They were afraid that death would take everything away from them. Even the first emperor who had conquered the world from the weak Qin dynasty to the strong Qin dynasty was no exception. He wantonly searched for necromancers and even spent a lot of money to send Su Fu out to sea to find the elixir of immortality for him. Unfortunately, he could not escape the erosion of time and the great Qin dynasty died for the second time. Compared to the illusory legends in the previous life, the elixir of immortality on the Tianwu continent had appeared. After a period of accumulation, it had gained some fame and attracted many cultivators who were nearing the end of their lifespan to the Jade Lake Palace in the south of the Shenwu dynasty to take the elixir of immortality. Although everyone knew that those who took the elixir of immortality did not voluntarily become the Jade Lake Palace's consecrators, few could resist the temptation of immortality and threw themselves into the arms of the Jade Lake Palace. Now, the Jade Lake Celestial Palace had accepted more than 100,000 tributes, and their cultivations were generally not low. Even the Shenwu dynasty at its peak would be afraid of such a force. However, Lei Qiusheng changed his previous domineering style and didn't do anything, as if the Jade Lake Celestial Palace didn't pose any threat to him. Some people guessed that the master behind the Jade Lake Palace was Lei Qiusheng. Some people guessed that Lei Qiusheng also wanted the elixir of immortality. But no matter what, the master of the Jade Lake Palace was already a powerful existence standing at the top of the Shenwu dynasty. If he wanted to meet the great Khan of the Shuangjin dynasty in the north, it would not be a small matter. When the great Khan was young, he was a terrifying existence that suppressed the Wanjian dynasty in the south and the Windsource dynasty in the north. If Mirafrost was a combination of wolf and dog, then this great Khan was a lion from head to toe, and a very aggressive one at that. Under his leadership, even a puppy would quickly grow into a ferocious wolf. No matter how heavily wounded it would not hide with its tail between its legs to lick its wounds. Instead, it would continue to fight its opponent to the death until the victor was decided. After devouring its opponent's corpse, it would become even stronger and more terrifying, and then seek out its next opponent. When the Great Khan was young, the so-called famous generals Yan Xingqi, Lei Qiusheng, and even the Marshal Saint Qi of the Wind Source were all no match for him. Even when both sides joined forces, they were still defeated by the Great Khan. Could it be? The shock in Lin Yuan's eyes intensified. He knew very well what the elixir of immortality was. It could indeed give people immortality, but that was when they were separated from their physical bodies. Even their original memories would be blurred. Before their cultivation reached a certain level, they would only listen to the orders of a higher-level sky demon. They could not even be considered as sky demons. After all, sky demons still had their own thoughts. These inferior races were no different from dogs in the eyes of a sky demon. However, not many people knew about this. What they valued most was immortality. After all, in the Tianwu continent that had lost the top inheritances, except for the top forces, most cultivators only pursued immortality. Cultivators like Incubus who pursued the Great Tao were too few. A shortcut had appeared in front of them. Who knew how many people with weak minds would want to try it? Although the Great Khan had once pursued the Great Tao, he was now old and could reach the end of his lifespan at any moment. If he was only a cultivator, he would definitely resist the so-called elixir of immortality. However, he still had the identity of the Great Khan. At the same time, he also knew that once he died, the entire bloodbath tribe would be nibbled away by others. His bloodline and clansmen would become slaves of others. Even if there was a 1 in 10,000 chance, the Great Khan would not be willing to die. If he did not want to die, he would have to accept the elixir of immortality and turn into a sky demon. Lei Qiusheng, who was already in cahoots with the sky demon, and Frost Mirror Khan, who obeyed the sky demon's every word, how could the northern frontier resist the joint attack of the two empires? Damn it! What are these top forces doing? Lin Yuan cursed angrily. Ding Zai had said before that they did not care about the dispute between the Shenwu dynasty and the northern frontier, but the Sky Demon's rebellion could only occur within the Shenwu dynasty. Once the northern frontier was destroyed, they would immediately intervene and wipe out the Sky Demon's troops and Lei Qiusheng. Furthermore, the Sky Demon, who had left the Shenwu dynasty's territory, would also be their target. But even if they did not care, this was such a big matter. Could it be that no one had come to give him a heads up? Did they trust his intelligence agency, or were they held back by other matters? Ever since he knew what the system was hiding in his body and what kind of enemies he had to face Lin Yuan did not dare to believe in the so-called luck anymore. He had to prepare for the worst. Even with the promise of the top forces, Lin Yuan did not dare to bet on whether the palace master of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace could reach the Shuangjin dynasty safely. Because the top forces only valued Lin Yuan's potential, they thought that Lin Yuan was qualified to stand side by side with them in the future, so they showed goodwill to Lin Yuan. However, this did not mean that Lin Yuan now had the ability to challenge the top forces. In a situation where the two sides were not equal in strength, promises were powerless and laughable. Even if they did not carry out the promise, they could just casually find an excuse to brush off Lin Yuan. Would Lin Yuan fall out with them? No, I can't just sit here and wait for death. A cold light flashed in his multicolored eyes. Lin Yuan gritted his teeth and soared into the sky, rushing toward the south. Ding! Congratulations to the host for triggering a mission, life and death. The Sky Demon's minions have launched an attack. With the power of the northern frontier alone, you are like a small boat in the sea. So, will you choose to guard the northern frontier and wait for the crisis to come, or will you take the initiative to attack and eliminate the crisis? Ding! Detected that the host has made a choice. The mission content has been changed. Please quickly find the palace master of the Jade Lake Immortal Palace and destroy her and her minions. Mission reward, 1 premium lucky draw ticket, failure punishment, face the joint attack of the Shenwu and Shuangjin dynasties. Countdown to failure, 3 days and 14 hours, the long-awaited mission window once again appeared in Lin Yuan's mind. Lin Yuan, who had been hiding in the northern frontier for several months, had to give up on suppressing the hidden dangers in the northern frontier. He had to show his strength again and fight. Chapter 537. Ever since he had broken through to the Mountain Lord realm, Lin Yuan no longer had any interest in personally killing his enemies to obtain attribute points. This was because every level up in this realm required an incomparably large amount of attribute points. It was so large that Lin Yuan did not even know the exact number of attribute points. If he wanted to obtain a few or a dozen attribute points from killing his enemies, it would be like pouring a cup of water on a burning cart of firewood. Lin Yuan now had two ways to rapidly increase his attribute points. One was to use the system to create a large number of life forms and then start a crazy war with all the surrounding forces. After all, Lin Yuan would also obtain a portion of attribute points from the lives these life forms killed. However, the cost-performance ratio of this method was very low. This was because Lin Yuan first had to obtain the materials from the life forms when creating life forms. After creating life forms, he still had to use his own stored attribute points to increase their strength. To put it bluntly, based on Moro's ability to create demonic beasts, the attribute points these demonic beasts gave Lin Yuan were not even as much as what Lin Yuan invested in them. There was still a long way to go before he could completely enter the mode where he could reap great rewards if he just left them alone. Furthermore, the demonic beasts he created were not immortal. Lin Yuan had already created several demonic beasts that had been upgraded to level 7 of the Wisdom Realm. However, they had all died in battle during the conflict with the Green Swamp clan. No matter how one looked at it, this path was not only a small reward, but also a high risk. It was also easy to lose everything. The other method was the Joss Flame model. This was the Joss Flame power that was produced when countless life forms worshipped Lin Yuan. In fact, it could be converted into various types of energy. Under a certain ratio, Lin Yuan could directly convert the Joss Flame power into attribute points. Although this function had not yet been activated due to the failure of the previous mission, every system model that accumulated to a certain extent would successively activate the sub-functions of the model. For example, the territory model's soldier creation, the war model's war treasury, and war mission. Therefore, when the Joss Flame power accumulated to a certain extent, this conversion function would be activated sooner or later. The endless power of incense meant that even if Lin Yuan were to lie down and not move, he would be able to obtain a large number of attribute points. Moreover, the strands of Lin Yuan's divine sense in the Dragon King Temple could become Lin Yuan's doppelganger under the influence of the power of incense, helping him oversee the northern frontier's territory. Even if Lin Yuan's main body died, he could replace one of the strands of divine sense to continue living and use the power of incense to rebuild his body. The Dragon King Temple represented Lin Yuan's infinite life. Unless Lin Yuan was wiped out by the system, or if his opponent destroyed the Dragon King Temple and killed all his followers, Lin Yuan would never completely die. Even if he died, he could be reborn as a Yin Master. However, in that case, Lin Yuan would become a special life form that relied on the power of incense to exist and become stronger. He would be even more miserable than Li Zhong, who cultivated the sun of heaven gazing at air. This was because the withered territory would only cause the ruler to lose all his cultivation and followers to be wiped out. However, it would cause a Yin Master to die directly. Lin Yuan was very sure that this Joss Flame model was the correct path for him to progress to the next stage of his growth. Moreover, the Joss Flame model itself was also an inexhaustible treasure. Of course, becoming a Yin Master was not completely without hidden dangers. This was because this was the path that the system had chosen for him. If the investiture of the gods was a battle between the way of the heavens and Hongjun, then escaping from the origin world of the untainted land was undoubtedly the best example. During the investiture of the gods, the insufferably arrogant experts had almost all fallen in the battle of the investiture of the gods. After that, they were listed on the investiture of the gods, which could be considered as a branch of the Yin Master. Their survival depended on the power of incense. It was not an exaggeration to call them slaves. After all, if one wanted to kill these gods, one only needed to say that they were superstitious. Slowly reducing their followers, their strength would become weaker and weaker. Even the insufferably arrogant experts of the Antiquity Age would gradually be unable to show their existence. Therefore, Lin Yuan was very sure that before he had enough strength to challenge Hongjun and the way of the heavens, he could walk this path. However, he could not walk too deep into it. Otherwise, the situation of those famous experts withering after becoming gods would reappear on him. However, the production of the power of incense was still a difficult problem for the current Lin Yuan. Therefore, he could not leave even if he wanted to. Because he had already become the god of the northern frontier, there were no other gods in this land. The Dragon King temples in various places were also flourishing with incense. However, this was meaningless because the people in the northern frontier did not sincerely believe in him. In the hearts of the people who did not know about the struggle between the upper class, even Li Zhong's prestige was higher than Lin Yuan's. This was because Lin Yuan's existence was good for the entire northern frontier. However, Li Zhong's actions had helped the people at the bottom to obtain benefits that they could see and touch. The people who had set up shrines to Li Zhong at home were more pious than Lin Yuan's. Those who knew about Lin Yuan's actions were either the heads of aristocratic families or the subordinates of Lin Yuan who existed for their own ambitions. They would treat Lin Yuan as an excellent ruler, but they would not treat Lin Yuan as a true god. Without devout believers, it was naturally impossible to produce the power of incense. Lin Yuan thought about this problem in his mind as he hurried on his way. Of course, he could easily make the people in the northern frontier become his devout believers. However, in that case, the meaning of Li Zhong's existence would be lost. Lin Yuan was also not suitable to do these things personally. After all, a monster doing its best for the welfare of the human people. Not to mention whether others would believe this, even Lin Yuan himself felt awkward. System, tell me, how can I obtain the power of incense? Lin Yuan narrowed his eyes slightly and asked in a deep voice. The system maintained its silence, obviously unwilling to respond to Lin Yuan. After all, it had already planned out the path to obtain the power of incense for Lin Yuan. It had even offered the big pie of conversion templates. However, Lin Yuan did not do as it wished and even failed the mission. After entering the arcane realm and consuming the dragonization root, he even obtained the nether realm's black water, an innate talent that even the system had to be wary of. It would be strange if it still wanted to respond to Lin Yuan. When humans are faced with despair, they will seek comfort from the spiritual level. If you want the people in the northern frontier to worship and worship you, then your actions are undoubtedly a failure. This is because they are safe, happy, and prosperous under your control. They believe that everything they want can be obtained through their own efforts. The existence of a god does not mean much to them. Under such circumstances, if you expect them to worship you as a god, then you might as well expect the power of incense to appear out of thin air. After a long while, the system finally complained somewhat helplessly. Chapter 538. Lin Yuan rolled his eyes helplessly at the system's ridicule. He didn't think his actions were wrong. After all, he lived in a blissful era without any legends of gods. In the world of his previous life, everything could be obtained through hard work. After coming to this world, Lin Yuan used his own hard work to transform the northern frontier into what he knew. This northern frontier would make Lin Yuan feel close and familiar, and wouldn't make him feel out of place as an outsider with memories of his previous life. But here was the problem. Because this time, he wasn't walking in the world as a human. He was that god. As a god, he was telling the world that even without the blessings of gods, they could obtain everything through their own hard work. Wasn't this dragging himself down? Host, you still have a chance to repent. As long as you give up part of the benefits of the northern frontier and let the northern frontier return to its previous path, you can use facts to tell the world that without your protection, everything they see is just a bubble that can collapse at any time. Under such circumstances, they will quickly give up on the idea of a new life and worship you, the high and mighty god, once again. The system couldn't be bothered to ridicule Lin Yuan's actions. Lin Yuan's origin world had abolished feudal superstitions and rejected all kinds of supernatural beings because that was the method used by the heavenly axiom to deal with the increasingly powerful gods. After all, the heavenly axiom didn't rely on the power of faith to exist. However, as the god it chose, Lin Yuan didn't hesitate to use such methods. He was simply making life difficult for himself. This also caused Lin Yuan's cultivation to progress slowly after he became a mountain lord, and he still hadn't broken through to the second level of the mountain lord realm. This was a classic example of me against myself. It seemed that although Lin Yuan's actions were dragging himself down, it wasn't to the point where he couldn't be saved. This was because although the people of the northern frontier had experienced a change of dynasties, they were still the same people. They still had a sense of reverence for powerful cultivators and ancient gods. As long as Lin Yuan was willing to let them face despair, they would still worship Lin Yuan as their faith, and he would be able to create an endless supply of incense. I'll think about it. Lin Yuan took a deep breath and began to travel at full speed. In ancient times, regardless of whether it was humans or gods, they all had the power to lift things as if they were light. It was a power that was enough to make the heavenly Tao tremble in fear. For example, even King Zhou of Shang, the first fatuous ruler of all time, was a terrifying existence known as the King of Men. He was so terrifying that he did not feel any psychological burden when he did something like molesting Nuwa. Nuwa could not even do anything to him. She could only use all kinds of tricks to plot against King Zhou of Shang and make him lose his kingly aura. That was how Zhou replaced Shang. On the other hand, if what happened in the future of Untainted Land was as Lin Yuan had guessed, the position of King Zhou should be Lin Yuan's future goal. An existence that could be compared to Hongjun and the heavenly Tao. That's right, they're on the same level. He did not care about Nuwa, who was in Hongjun's camp. At the same time, the entire Great Zhou faction was his enemy. This was because King Zhou was known as the King of Men, while the Emperor of Zhou was known as the Son of Heaven. This title already explained too many problems. The ruler of the Shang dynasty was the King of Men, who represented the human race. He was an existence that could wrestle with the heavenly Tao and Hongjun's camps. Even in the secular world, the Shang dynasty had absolute power. Even the sages could not do anything to him. Although King Zhou was the loser, he was not defeated by any side. It was the other two camps that joined forces to deal with him. This also showed that Hongjun and the heavenly Tao were afraid of this King of Men. Of course, in the process of the two camps dealing with the King of Men, the one who had the last laugh was still the origin of the heavenly Tao. This was because the victor's king called himself the Son of Heaven, which implied that he was the eldest son or son of heaven. However, the heavenly Tao obtained the ruling power of the secular world, while Hongjun's side came up with the list of deification, officially putting the special existence of God on the stage. They told the world that everything was bestowed by God. Even if the Son of Heaven was unvirtuous, it would make the gods angry and cause all kinds of natural and man-made disasters. They tried to place God above a man, and then started the second battle between the two sides. In order to erase the influence of the gods on the secular world, the heavenly Tao of the source world could be said to have painstakingly gone through the changes of countless dynasties. Finally, the so-called Son of Heaven's right was banned, and the high and mighty emperor was beaten into a mortal. All kinds of beliefs and sacrifices were cancelled. It was not easy to make God become a legend and gradually fade away. However, in this battle, the winner might not necessarily be the heavenly Tao. This was because although it banned the concept of God, man, who had been unable to recover from the setback after King Zhou, rose again. He used the power of science and technology to fight against the heavenly Tao. Even the title of Son of Heaven was abolished. After a short conversation, Lin Yuan quickly straightened out his thoughts. Firstly, the heavenly Tao and Hongjun were not existences that he could not contend with. This was because the former King Zhou and the previous King of Men, in his previous life had become victors through a long period of time and hard work. They had become existences that the heavenly Tao and Hongjun feared. Secondly, Lin Yuan had also determined his future path, King Zhou. He was not a mortal with a physical body. He, who had the ability to cultivate, did not need to completely rely on the power of science and technology. He could completely become an existence like King Zhou and directly participate in the struggle between Hongjun and the heavenly Tao. He did not need to use the power of science and technology to deter the other two camps and simply make them not dare to use him as a chess piece. Lin Yuan did not like to be schemed against, and he did not like to have his life and death in the hands of others. Therefore, his goal was not to protect himself, but to win. He wanted to let these existences, who had been high and mighty since the prehistoric times, know the will and power of a man. Even though he had lost the appearance and habits of a human, the essence of Lin Yuan's soul had not changed for a moment. Even when he came to this world, the thoughts that constantly spurred him to become stronger and return to his original world to take revenge had not faded for a moment. It was just that before that, he had a new goal. Whatever. However, I have to remind the host that no matter how powerful a life form is, there is a limit to its lifespan. Although you are very young, it is still very difficult for you to enter the next realm without relying on the power of incense. And even if you can do it, how will you cross the next realm? You are the host chosen by this system. In the future, you will also evolve into a life form that will make all the world submit to you. Although this system will not force you to do anything, it will re-examine your potential at any time. If you lose the space to improve, this system will unbind you at any time and choose a new host. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.